sunshine. Don't look behind you. It's a nice day. I really appreciate you guys showing up for this. I know it's kind of a stretch. There are pesticide credits. So hopefully that's like, if there's one carrot that I'll dangle, it's that. But also there's some good speakers, and I think that it'll be good. So Abby Gehring, Jason Meyer, and then Elisa Lockhart. If you guys have any questions, feel free to find any one of us. Bathrooms are just through that door and kind of along across the hallway. If you backed in, if you pulled through, you might get a little bit of a fine of some sort. So, and if you don't have a permit. So if that is potentially you in the parking lot, then I would probably suggest hustling out there. But don't drive away. I know, again, just don't look outside. It's sunny. I'm trying to think if there's anything. This doesn't exist without sponsors. It just doesn't happen. So I really do want to thank Valley Ag for stepping up, the ORBC. We have a block grant with the Oregon Department of Ag for the thanks when you see them. I think we can probably get started. Abby, do you want to, we'll start with the first presentation and make sure that and then does it have to be on that screen? So we have, so a little bit of background on this. Michael Hartigan is coming up to speak about raspberries, and over the last couple of years, or definitely over the last year, I've been getting several phone calls from growers, particularly in Oregon, who are really curious about red raspberry. And I hadn't heard anybody curious about red raspberry since I started working for this industry in 2008. So I thought that it would be good to have some discussion, have Michael come out. You know, there's always concerns about root rot and just kind of growing here versus growing up farther north. So anyway, Michael, thank you for coming here and giving us some red raspberry overview.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Julie. So yeah, I'm going to be providing some updates on the red raspberry program. I had to take a closer look at some of the sales numbers because I actually was not aware of the resurgence of red raspberry in Oregon until Julie approached me about this. All right, hold on. This cookie. How to turn this thing
Your keyboard's not working either.
No.
straight down.
Was this computer here last time? Maybe try 16.
Oh, there. Wait.
Okay, so I'll use the mouse then.
Just try the Is it working?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay.
All right, so sorry about that. So yeah, I had to kind of take a look at some of the raspberry sales for the last 10 years and the last couple of years after talking to Julie a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, it looks like, after red raspberry's been going down since 2016, leading up to 2021, that there has been sort of a spike in sales in the last couple of years in Oregon. It looks like that's also across the board for caneberries. That includes, blackberry, which you see in green here, and also black raspberry. But yeah, so I think that's interesting. We're happy to see people interested because we work on red raspberries in the program in close cooperation with Washington State. And whether this is from, increased demand or people wanting to, get new plants after 2020 heat damage, that's actually still a question for me. Looking at some of what's been sold in Oregon in the last couple of years. So, it looks like Meeker in 2022 is still the most popular, and then Washington State Cascade varieties after that, kind of comprise most of the sales. But this last year I was actually interested to see that somebody purchased a whole lot of a primocane fruiting raspberry Noelia to plant out. So that's interesting to us because we work on primocane fruiters as well, in addition to machine harvest processing types. And so if there are folks who are interested in getting more into late season or fresh market production in Oregon, we're also trying to support variety development in that space too. So in terms of what are we doing to support red raspberry, the USDA breeding program? So I would say our primary goal is to work, in close cooperation with Washington State to identify and develop machine harvestable processing types. So we're trialing our genetics and Washington State genetics in Aurora, Oregon at our NREC. And then we're sending our stuff up to Washington State to trial at their trials as well in Linden, Washington. And then when we identify things we think are good, we're releasing them to the nurseries. So if you're interested in trying selections from our program, they're usually at North American Plants. For Washington State material, I believe at Northwest Plant Company, but also we can provide contact information for Wendy Hawashi Earhart up there for people who are interested in their stuff. And as I mentioned before, we're also working on primocane types for fresh. So if there are people who are interested in late season production, or if there are people who want to try something for the fresh market, we can provide for that too. In addition to just sort of the applied breeding efforts, we kind of have a couple other goals on the raspberry side. One of them is since 2021, we're really interested in identifying things with just better stress tolerance that can handle a little bit more heat, because we saw things that really got fried. And then we're also interested in getting into more research studies to look at the genetics of disease resistance. So right now, we started projects to look at the genetics of root lesion nematode resistance, raspberry bushy dwarf virus resistance, and then also to look at the genetics of fruit quality. So most of the data we're getting down here in Oregon is coming out of the OSU NREC in Aurora. So this is where all the selections that we make down in Corvallis out of our big seedling populations, they get propagated and go up there into the plots where they can get machine harvested. So looking at the yield over the last few years, we've seen things outside of the heat dome years be pretty steady. 2021, they took a drop, and in 2022, it seems like things did not fully recover, but last year they kind of moved back up to what we were seeing pre-heat dome. And when we break things down by just sort of our replicated selections, which are our best performing things, and we look at them by cultivars versus Oregon, which you see in green, versus Washington material, which you see in blue, what we're seeing is our stuff, we're doing good often. We're identifying things that are more productive than Meeker, which is our standard, and that have at least as good a plant health. But we're usually just a step behind the Washington State material in terms of productivity. The exception is that we saw some things on our side that when we were having those really heat stressful years, that we were actually getting some better performance than WSU material. And I think maybe some of that is just because it was selected in this Oregon environment instead of stuff up in Northwest Washington that's getting moved down here. So this is an example, in our trial that was planted in 2018, they got harvested in 2020 and 2021. We saw a majority of things, like if you look at this graph, where the percent yield change from 2020 going into the 2021 heat dome they dropped off by usually 0 to 50% yield. What we saw at the top end, there are a handful of things that were mostly our Oregon material that actually had less of a loss of yield as a result of the heat damage, and a couple of things that actually gained in productivity. And it's 1 year, so it's anecdotal, but I think the good thing is it tells us in terms of breeding for better heat tolerance, stress tolerance, that there's actually the genetic potential there in the programs. So that's a big focus of the, our selection effort going forward. So this is an example of one, that, 4975 went from 3 tons per acre to 7.7 in the year with the heat dome. Obviously, the fruit quality was not as good as it would have been otherwise, but just the fact that it was able to maintain productivity or increase as it established despite the heat, tells us there are things that are floating around that we can use to make improvements and get things that are better stress adapted. Here's some other examples of things we're actually trying to get onto the nursery list that we saw during the heat dome that looked pretty productive compared to a lot of other things that fell off. So these top yielders in our replicated trial plots, these guys, 4974-1 and 4715-2. So these were things that were, a lot of the other plants were just looking really cooked. They actually managed to maintain what looked like good plant health and semi-decent fruit quality throughout all that heat. So 4974-1 is one that we're really trying to get onto the nursery list. We've been struggling a bit to get it propagated. But the fruit that we saw in the heat dome were probably the least impacted in the trials that year. And the plant just looked good, and maybe because it has some species diversity in its background. But yeah, it just really seemed to weather that pretty well. And then another one, 4715-2, wasn't quite as resistant. The plant health was good. The fruit quality didn't stay quite as high, but it seems like it might have been more just the canopy sheltered the fruit well through some of those heat events. So here's some pictures this is the week right after that June 29th, 117 maximum heat, that we experienced. And the plants came out looking pretty good. So compared to Meeker in the lower left, it was looking pretty tired. The 4974, the fruit, still not as good as it's been on other years, but still looked half decent, and the plants were looking quite nice. And then looking at some of the IQF quality of the fruit coming out of those heat dome, samples, 4715-2 and 4974-1 both managed to kind of hold on to some fruit quality. In a normal year, they'd probably look closer to Meeker in terms of quality, but you can see Meeker was a little more crumbly during that season. These ones managed to maintain some good quality. I also want to highlight these WSU selections because these are things that their program is looking at pushing forward in the next year or two. WSU 2069 and 2087. Those looked very good coming out of that year as well, and have looked really good since in our trials. So we think there's some good promise with those. So I just want to talk a little bit about these because, like I said, Wendy at WSU is trying to push them forward, and they have looked really good at our location in Aurora as well. So we've seen 2 years of machine harvest data and IQF out of these, and they looked good both years. So WSU 2087, this one, it's super firm. It's kind of a round berry, but it's just got really, really good firmness and durability and druplet coherence. And it does look a bit dark, which can, it's much darker than a lot of the other berries we see. So initially, it kind of looks like maybe it's been hanging for a little bit longer than it should. But then when you do the IQF and you actually, taste it, the texture, it's really, really good. The flavor is good, but the fruit quality just really, really stands out. 2069 has also been great for us in terms of yield and IQF at the Aurora station. This one, I would say it's more visually attractive than 2087, but it doesn't have quite the firmness that 2087 does. And it doesn't IQF quite as well, but it's still quite a bit better than Meeker, I would say. So this kind of shows some of it's not showing up quite as well, but the yield curves of these selections I'm talking about. The other thing we see about them is that they kind of peak a little bit earlier in the season than Meeker. It's a little bit hard to see this blue line compared to the red line. But 2069 and 2087 also get some of their yields off a little bit earlier. So I think, when we were seeing a lot of heat stress, that could also be something that gave an advantage. Maybe they just sort of were able to get more fruit off before the heat really set in. Looking at the yields, 2087 was the best yielding replicated selection out of our 2020 trial. 2069 was close. They all averaged about 4.3 tons per acre over the course of the season compared to 3.2 for meager. So we're happy about that. And like I said before, 2087, just dark, round, really firm and consistent. 2069, also consistent, not as firm, but it's just it has a really nice appearance and really, really good flavor and small seeds. I think the only downside we saw 2087 is compared to 2069 and some of the other material, we were seeing more stems coming off in the machine harvester. So that could have been something that maybe could have been tuned better on the machine harvester side, but yeah, just something to be aware of with that. And this was something we saw actually at our cutting just a few weeks ago in February, and we appreciate anybody from the industry who showed up to that. So we pulled out IQF berries, at 8 a.m., looked at them at 8 a.m., and then we're evaluating over the course of the day. And then we photographed everything again at 2 p.m. So you see things start to kind of leak or come apart at different times. And basically by 2 p.m., almost all of our red raspberries are kind of sitting in a sitting in a pool of juice. But 2087 is really, really impressive. Even after 6 hours sitting out, saw no leakage or crumbling on it. Just really seems to be a super durable raspberry. But that doesn't equate to it being, tough or unpleasant to eat. The texture is really nice and the flavor is good. So I think that's one that's definitely worth reaching out to WSU about testing. I just want to follow up on some of the results of the cuttings we do at OSU Food Science with Zach Weekend. So this is where basically we try to get public and industry to come in and give us feedback on the fruit samples that are coming out of our IQF of the fruit coming down from the rack. And it's really useful for us because, we get people to rate appearance, texture, sweetness, and flavor. We also try to get people to score whether they like something, as much or better than the cultivar standards. And so we can kind of sort these on, sort of the public and industry response to how much people liked these things overall, and then their individual traits. So we saw, there were some things here people really loved. Up here at the top, 2001, people love the flavor on it, but unfortunately it basically was soup. So it's very, very delicious raspberry, soup. So I think WSU is looking at not advancing that one, but just shows, people really gravitate towards a good tasting berry. Got a couple other promising things up here from the Oregon program, but down here, 2069 and 2087 were definitely they were above average for how much people liked those overall. And we saw that 2087 for appearance and texture rated more highly than any other raspberry that day. Down in the Primacane material, we were happy to see our new cultivar Thinberry, which we hope people will try. People liked it, I guess, just based on their scores of overall liking, better than any other berry sample that day. And we're not surprised by that. It's a really great tasting berry. It doesn't have the highest bricks or sweetness, but it's got this sort of tart aromatic flavor and just looks nice that people seem to like. And then for people who are interested, Primacanes can contact us, but we've got some other things like this 4487 that's very early season, and it's not as pretty as Finberry, but it's a really, really delicious berry. People love the flavor on it more than anything else. So some of our newer raspberry trials, this is sort of preliminary data, so there still isn't a whole lot coming out in terms of plants that are available now. But we're excited to see, just looking at these yield curves going from, mid-June into July compared to this meager curve, we're starting to see some very productive things coming out that hit that early season window, which, it's not necessarily going to equate to giving you heat tolerance, but at least maybe people getting more crop off in June before, some of the heat starts to really hit could be an advantage. And so we're seeing these promising early season genetics with good color, good IQF, low leakage, and free crumbling, and high firmness and druplet coherence. But here's one example of one that we were really excited about. This ORUS 5310 was our highest yielding selection this last season, and you're getting a lot of the fruit off early on in the season before you're getting fruit, most of your fruit off of things like meager. And so this one we're really excited about just because of its productivity and fruit quality is high. Here's another even earlier season one that it's not quite as high yielding as the 53, but just to kind of show we're starting to get more material that can really produce, higher yields early on. I think this one was actually getting most of its berries off in June, which we liked. And then, yeah, so I just want to briefly touch on some of the primocane raspberry material we're working on. So Finberry, just talked about that a minute ago. If people are interested in doing a little bit of fresh or late season production, this one is just a really, really good tasting berry, and it's been higher yielding than Kokanee, our last release, and Polka and Heritage, which we use as standards here in Oregon. So it's delicious, it's got good yields, and it can be harvested even a little bit prematurely at the pink stage with good flavor, and it'll color up a bit when you put it in a cooler. And this is sort of the next thing following on from Finberry that we have in North American plants now, or US 5209-1. So it's got a lot of similar qualities to Finberry in terms of the actual fruit, but it's more productive and it's got a little bit of a different plant architecture. I think it's got a little more sturdy erect canes. Finberry, once the fruit really start to load up, it can kind of start to weep a little bit if it's not really well supported. This one maybe a little bit better in that regard. But the yield has been good over the years we've tested it. And so I just briefly want to touch on some of the genetics projects we have going on. So we're trying, like I mentioned at the start of the talk, we're trying to start identifying genes so we can do, molecular breeding and marker selection for things like disease resistance and fruit firmness. So we planted this really big research trial up in Mount Vernon, Washington, where we have 270 selections of cultivars that are replicated 6 times from our program, from the WSU program, from British Columbia, and from the Gene Bank in Corvallis, to just represent all of the Northwest raspberry diversity that's been grown in the last, 100 years. And so we're using this as a long-term genetic study. Right now, we're identifying root lesion nematode resistance, and the idea is in the future, be able to use genetic markers to select for root lesion nematode resistance. And moving on from that, we're going to start using it to try to identify genes for things like firmness and frozen fruit quality. And the idea is in the future, long term, we'll be able to have genetic markers where we can kind of select for those traits in the breeding program early on and try to sort of accelerate some of our germplasm development. So that's pretty preliminary right now. So right now we're just in the process of getting the root lesion nematode resistance data out of it, which is just comparing plant growth in the uninoculated and inoculated plots. So there'll be more information coming out about that over the next year or two. So yeah, looking toward the future, I guess right now, which I think is kind of pertinent to this, discussion today, the resurgence of raspberries. A question for us, because we're a really spread out program. We do blackberries, we do black raspberries, and we do red raspberries, is really how happy are Oregon growers with raspberry cultivars that are coming out of private breeding programs, WSU, British Columbia. We want to continue working on red raspberry, and we'll definitely continue trialing them at the NREC. But since we're so spread out as a program, we're always kind of a half step behind in terms of being competitive in the cultivar release space. And it's probably going to remain that way while there are programs that are more fully dedicated to red raspberries. And so a question for us is, for Oregon growers especially, is it important to have, Oregon tailored cultivar releases, or are the varieties that are being brought down for programs in Washington, are they performing well enough here, at least in the machine harvest and processing side, to give you what you want? And so that's what we're trying to figure out right now, because just in terms of what we're able to do and how much bandwidth we have to breed and trial things at the NREC, we need to try to prioritize. So blackberry is always going to be top priority. The question is, how much is red raspberry going to be? Is it going to be a support role, or do people in Oregon want us to be a cultivar release program? So that's what we're trying to figure out over these next couple of seasons. But in terms of ongoing research, our focus is selecting more stress and heat tolerant raspberry types. selecting better primocane types for late season and fresh to complement our floricane machine harvest efforts, and then kind of long-term identifying genes for nematode resistance, RBDV resistance, fruit firmness, and IQF quality, and start selecting for those genes using, molecular breeding and genetic markers. So yeah, that's it for today. I just want to thank the Oregon Raspberry Blackberry Commission, Northwest Center, Washington Red Raspberry, everybody who supports us funding-wise, and also cooperators like North American Plants who help us propagate our selections. And if you have interest in testing selections for the program, including anything you might have questions about today, let us know. We can put you in contact with nursery propagators or kind of help you figure out what might be interesting for you to test out if you want to try some of these. Yeah, so that's it. Happy to take any questions if folks. Yeah.
A quick question. You asked a good question at the end, and that was just kind of general direction, but and maybe I missed it. Do you have any of the Wakefield or there's that new variety Colchia in any of your trials to see how those perform here in Oregon?
Yeah, so we got Wakefield and one of our Wakefield and Wake Haven, the standards in one of our trials a couple of years ago, but it hasn't been as consistent as Meeker.
Okay.
So part of that I think has been just what we've seen in terms of popularity. Meeker has been a popular plant that a lot of people grow. So we've just stuck with that as a standard. But if people think that's important to make sure Wakefield is included in the trials as a standard or even replace Meeker, I think we'd probably keep Meeker around at least as an observation plot just to see how it does. But yeah, if you feel that's important, we can definitely try to make sure we're including it.
It just seems like there's a lot of noise about those varieties, and in Washington they're going from Meeker to that, and so it just would be nice to see that benchmark is like, how does that perform in Oregon? And are the new cultivars, are they I guess how are they competing against some of the stuff that the industry thinks is some of the best stuff out there now?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is helpful.
The new one is you said Colchia?
Yeah.
Is that what's coming out of the Driscoll's Mayberry?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we need to follow up on that one because I've heard that there's excitement about that in Washington, even as something that could compete with Wakefield. So yeah, we will look into that.
Yeah. Thanks.
I have heard about, because the berry's so big, and I believe the way that it's licensed is for processing only for outside growers, that it is trickier to process because it's so big. So there's, nitrogen dips involved and a few other things that come up. So, but anyway, sorry, I know we've already run over time, but
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, it's, totally fine. Anyway, thank you, Michael. So next up is Virginia Stockwell. She is also with the USDA ARS, but on the other side of the research unit than Michael. I can never.
They divorced us.
They did. Yeah. 5 or 6. We did a sprayer panel, sprayer technology panel, and so we're gonna bring that back in. And this year we have 2 people on. I feel like it was with the ag show going on and everything else outside. I really do appreciate both Proud and Co-op, but also on Target Spray Systems for coming in. So Ariel Gelman, right? Yeah. He works for Earth Irrigation now, but he has done several years with working with On Target Spray Systems. So he's going to be speaking, and then we will have Quincy Pittman, who is with Proud and Co-op, and you are the research.
Yeah, so I do permanent crop research, but speaking for our precision ag technician.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And so, so anyway, they'll both have some minutes to talk about their spray technologies, and then will set you guys loose, but like be nice to them because they're here and not outside and not at the egg show. So, and I have some questions too that in advance. So you guys can both come sit down. And then we'll have Ariel, you start with your slides, and then Quincy, you'll go after. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to stay here?
Yeah, yeah, you can hopefully the slide advance.
Well, no, good morning, everybody. Thank you. I see a lot of familiar faces, so that's good. I would say, what a good day to start spraying, right? First day, yeah. So that would be today a good day to spray. So yeah, thank you. So I worked for several years with On Target and got my experience from there. Just to give you a little bit of background, On Target has been here for the last 25 years. It's a local company, close in Mount Angel. And the nice thing about On Target, that in today's world you can save water, you're gonna use less time, and the last thing is that you use less horsepower overall. So kind of the way On Target works for the people that is not very familiar, we have three main things. We have air, water, and power, electricity, okay? So we mix those things together, and by doing that, we can spray much less water compared to regular sprayers. When we are talking about a regular sprayer, we are doing 60, 80 to 100 gallons an acre. With On Target, we try 12, 15, 20 gallons, and still we saw very good efficacy and efficiency, especially with organic products. So that's kind of the first thing about On Target. We would say, oh, there you go. So, like we say, the nice thing about On Target is always trying to innovate, it follows the new regulations, and it's always doing research. Currently, we are doing different researches with, especially in California, Cal Poly, UC Davis, trying to find and explain electrostatic and to show people. The interesting about electrostatic is that it's been there for 20, 30, 40 years, but still people is not very open to the idea of electrostatic sprayers. So we are still looking and showing with research and proof how the electrostatic systems they work. So here is going to be a video. It's connected to the internet. Julie, this computer should be
Should be,
show a little bit. It's just 1 minute, but it's really cool to see how you can see how a conventional when it's sprayed with regular water and how it changes when we do electrostatic system. It's here. Can see everybody see there? Yeah. It's really fast. So it's gonna be a regular spray with regular water. Gonna go now. And we're gonna turn on the electrostatic on the next seconds, and you're gonna see the difference on the hydrosensitive paper. There you go. And if, as everybody can see here, you can see how the coverage changes on the fruit, and it's kind of involving around the fruit, and we are getting that coverage that we were a regular sprayer, we were not getting that. So that's a short, quick video that pretty much shows efficiency and how it works. Here is pretty much the same. We have, by doing that, we could see how the coverage works, how the water is getting to the back, how the chemicals get into the back too, and that's what it makes really cool electrostatic. Something that is very important, and again with organic products, is the biological. When we have different products like, I don't know, blackberries, blueberries on Venerate, Entrust, peroxides, products like that, coverage is super, super important. So when we add that, an electrostatic system plus the air and other factors really helps the coverage and really helps on the spray. Here, we are trying to do new innovations, trying to share companies with autonomy services or other tractors, electrical tractors, especially with some of the new regulations in California, other places that many of us might not like very much, but part of what is coming, right? So it's important to understand that this will be a zero emission with only the electric system. We don't have any power. Pretty much everything comes from the PTO that is gonna move the water pump, the compressor, and everything. And we are doing zero emissions. This is a good example of Caneberries. We are doing something with a company named Burroughs or Autonomy. It's pretty much, we have the sprayer there. You could see those tubes. We can adapt them, move them upside down to the sides. depending the preferences of farmers. I know that some farmers like to spray from the top, some other farmers like to spray from the bottom. That will go more on preferences. And it's important again to understand that the electrostatic system is going to do a coverage, right? So not necessarily by having it on the top, we are doing the best job, or not necessarily by having it on the bottom, you're going to be doing coverage. Again, I know some farmers prefer up and down, but with the electrostatic is you can get a very good coverage, not necessarily by having the booms on a specific place. Here is a different examples with different angles of the booms, how you can move them and how you can change them. And here is what I was saying, guys, is the big hose for the air, and then you will have one cable for the power, and then it's the other one, the last one is for the water. That's Burroughs is a company, again, that is kind of autonomous system that works, if we are working with them, especially for grapes and products like that, that pretty much is self-propelled, no driver. You put a small sprayer and could work either grapes or 7 feet, 8 feet wide, 10 feet wide, work totally fine. This product on Target released last year. It's a small setup that you can put it on a mule, on an RTV. Pretty much it's a tank with a gas pump that goes on the back of the UTV and fits, again, small rows like grapes, 7, 8, 9 feet. And of course will work perfectly for blackberries. It's a small setup that is pretty much super easy to use. And the nice thing is we come back to the point that if you're doing a regular spray, you're doing 80, 100 gallons, 60 gallons, and it's what, 1-2 acres, depending on the size of the tank. With an on-target, you could do, if you have like a 200 gallons, you could be doing 10 to 12 acres in one shot. And that will save you time on mixing, going up and down. And of course, if you have people working for you, if you have a mixer and a spray guy, they will stop, they will chat. So all that time will be saved with the on-target spray, right? So that's a very good thing about on-target. This is a 2-row sprayer that we could see. Here is pretty good at how everybody can see. We are doing 20 gallons per acre, 4 miles per hour in a 400-gallon tank with only 30 horsepower. So if you do the numbers, 400, yeah, you are doing pretty much 20 acres with one shot. When with a regular spray, you will be doing 3 to 4 acres, going again up and down, reloading, remixing everything, and you will have to go and spray again. Another example, connected to a 3 points PTO, much easier for me to say in Spanish, but yeah, that's another example. So that would be another idea. Here we could see the sprays, like I was saying. In this case, they have it from the top. Some other people will have it from the bottom or from the side. It's more preferences. The system works and proved for many years that usually we would like it from the sides and the top, and we get to the top of the plant too. Another example. Here we could see kind of, guys, how it's a setup on a sprayer. The yellow thing will be the compressor. We have the dashboard on the center that is giving the voltage. We are talking about on each nozzle, we have around 1,000 volts that is mixed with air and water. And that's what it creates the electrostatic system, right? Voltage, you have a positive, negative, and then the ground. We are, again, following and trying to work with different organizations to prove and through research and different options to see how not necessarily coverage and more gallons means better control. Probably then the guys from the drones can talk about it because it's, again, a similar concept. And again, we are working, everybody knows Monarch. We did a few researches with Monarch tractors, electric tractors that they are autonomous too. And again, that will be a 0 emission products. So that's pretty interesting to see. The nice thing about on-target, like I said, is local. It's here in Mount Angel. So if anybody wants to do demos, we could do the demos. We could do sprays for you, 8 to 10 acres, to show you how the system works, how the products work. We can go to your farm. Either you guys can contact Willie or me. I'm gonna leave a few minutes. We can talk more about it. And then we have the questions.
Yeah, we're gonna hold all the questions to the end, but don't forget them. Thanks, Ariel. And then
it's more fun. Like downtown. Yeah, it's a lot of that. Yeah. Number all the cuts. The extra flavor, extra chemical.
Okay, sweet. So I'm Quincy Pittman. I'm with Adam Co-op. I'm talking today in place of Chris Kaiser, who's our precision ag technician. He's gone. So I'm gonna do my very best to get you guys all the information you need on this drone technology that we've been doing. For those of you who don't know, Adam Co-op is an agricultural cooperative dedicated to innovative solutions, excellent service, and long-term relationships. And so my job and Chris's job falls under that dedication to innovative solutions. I'm on the research side. Chris is in the development of new technologies and bringing those to our growers in an applicable way. And so today I'm going to share with you a little bit about our drone technology that we started up last year. This is our first year doing it. We now have a full drone setup. It is a complete agricultural service that we're offering to people, and it's we sprayed just under 10,000 acres this year and are just under 2,000 acres in berry crops. And so I'm excited to kind of get to share that with you guys. There's been a rapid interest, I guess, in the technology, and I think it's really good. So yeah. All right, so I'm going to walk you through some of the basics of the drone, what it takes, some of our research and findings, some of examples so that you guys can see a little bit about coverage and different things, and then also the future of drone technology here in the Valley. So to start off, the drone, it is a DJI T30. It's a 7.5 gallon tank, so pretty small. Takes a lot of, we've got 2 of them at the moment, and so you're constantly shuffling. It's battery powered, and so we've got a generator, 4 battery packs, 2 chargers, and every time we go to fill up, we're rotating those out. So it's definitely hands-on, but also quite fast. Some of the capabilities of the drone, we found out it's best between a 3 and a 5 gallon per acre rate. Simply for coverage, speed. When you get up into that 10 gallon per acre rate, it's a little bit too high for it to starts to, I guess, muck up the system kind of, and it's not able to get that much volume out. And so, or you have to fly really slow. And so we found that 3 to 5 gallon per acre is ideal. At a 3 gallon per acre rate, you can cover a field in about 20 acres in an hour. And then at the 5 gallon per acre rate, you can cover 10 acres per hour, roughly. And so some of the benefits of the drones are that you can avoid irrigation equipment. You don't have to worry about moving piping in your field, and overhead irrigation, that's not really a problem in berry crops, but as far as field crops go, that is beneficial. You can also avoid a lot of crop damage, especially right around harvest time, knocking off blue fruit or ripe fruit. You can avoid that pretty well with the drone. Fly at a little bit of a higher elevation. You don't get as much downdraft, but still really good coverage, and you're preserving some of that fruit rather than going down the row and knocking it off. In the off season, when your fields are really wet, you're able to get out and do those fungicide applications where when you get a dry window, low wind, you're able to get out there where maybe some of that machinery down the road wouldn't be able to because you'd be sinking. Something to note, when you look at the picture up here on the screen, I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's a spray pattern that goes somewhat into a vortex type shape. And this really promotes good coverage into the crop canopy. You get a lot of downforce, but then it also updrafts. And so what we're seeing is really good coverage on both sides of the leaves and throughout the entire canopy, which is encouraging. Some of the limitations of the drone, we still have quite a few FAA regulations around it. So you can't do night flying. It's not allowed. It is registered as an aircraft because it's over 55 pounds, so we have to adhere to FAA regulation and stay up to date on all of the, I guess, regulations with that. Some other limitations would be an aerial label. They have low, or I guess high gallon per acre labels, so 10 gallon per acre for your aerial applications. It's a little bit too high for our drone, especially when you're doing fungicide applications. That's really common on the labeling. And so we are working with, working with chemical companies to see if we can't drop that rate carrier volume down and still get quality efficacy on those crops and coverage. So, and another one would be if you have high winds, we can't fly at those. So we're really flying at between, that 8 to 9 mile an hour is kind of our max, and before you see too much drift happening. And then some of the expectations that maybe you as a grower would need to have on this is that it's still an aerial application. You're not going to get right to a line. You're coming from 12 to 13 feet above the ground, and you're spraying down. And so if you've got a sensitive crop right next to what you're spraying, got to be mindful of that, I guess. And occasionally you'll run into barriers in the field, whether that's telephone poles or along the border of the field, you've got lots of trees. That drone, at times, if it's not able to fly clearly, we'll just have to stop it short, and then maybe, I don't think that's generally a problem in berry crops, but occasionally in field crops that is an issue. So with that, we'll keep going. Okay, some of our research and findings. Swath width for the drone is roughly 19 feet. We are flying at a height of 12 to 13 feet above ground level in berry crops. Our droplet size and nozzle tips, our nozzle tips are a TJet RX 0.02, which is a medium sized droplet, and that's really to reduce the driftable fines, because we don't want specifically herbicides, although that's not generally a problem in berry crops, spreading. And so we're really focused kind of on that area. And then the speed that we're flying at is at a 5 gallon per acre rate is roughly 9 miles per hour. And so with that, if you had a 50 acre field at a 5 gallon per acre rate, you'd be finishing in about 2.5 hours. So over berries, thinking about SWG sprays, you need to go generally every 7 days, depends on the grower, but that drone will really speed up your time in the field and get you across all your acres if necessary. Oh, and then one additional thing to note, spray direction. We had done a lot of trialing in this because to begin with, we had flown perpendicular when we were still in the testing phase. And so when you fly perpendicular to the rows, you're actually getting a lot of crop wash on one side as you fly, and then when you flip around and do the other side, you're getting a lot of crop wash on that side. And so if you fly parallel to the row, we're seeing that looping in the spray pattern and getting really solid coverage. So it's important that we fly parallel to the rows. So good that we did testing beforehand. All right, and then, so like I said, we've done about just under 10,000 acres total in field crops, all of these listed. So we've done it in berries, hazelnuts, a lot of our vegetable and seed crops, grass, and nursery stock as well. So with all of that, it's actually gone really well. Very few complaints, coverage has been good, efficacy is very high. And so that's been highly encouraging. And with that, we're looking at getting an additional setup here this summer. So as you can see, the spray pattern, we've done a lot of water sensitive paper testing to make sure that we're getting good coverage on our crops at all levels of the canopy. And occasionally this can be difficult because when you're out in the field and you go spray it and then you look at your water sensitive paper, it actually hasn't picked it up, but you can see it visibly on both sides of the leaf. So I'm going to be doing a lot of trialing this summer to make sure that we can kind of nail that down and pick up the results that we're getting better. To be able to show you guys. So yeah. All right, so the future of drone technology, it is evolving really rapidly, both in the forms of reliability in your technology and then it's scaling up in size, quite literally. So this second drone setup that we're going to be getting is with 2 larger drones, 13-gallon tanks. You could potentially cover a lot more acreage and still going the same rate, but just larger gallonage. So that's just an interesting thing to note. As well as with drone technology, you're getting increased NDVI imagery as a popularity. So you can fly a field, get a solid rating on your crop health and or problem areas in the field. And then maybe additionally with that, make target applications. And so we're still working on this development within our company to be able to say if you had a thistle issue, you could go, non-berry crops. I keep talking about grass. Anyways, but if you were growing grass, then you could go out and say spot spray those thistle areas. And I think that you could do a similar thing in berries with fungicide applications if you were seeing really problem areas or if that technology developed. So one additional thing to note is the FFA still has a lot of regulation on night flying and then also swarming. So we can't fly multiple drones at one time unless we're required to have 1 pilot per drone. And that is potentially being reevaluated here in about 8 weeks, but they're waiting for approval on that. So yeah, hopefully that answers most of your questions. And if not, Chris Kaiser's information is up here, and he is far more knowledgeable on all of this than me, but I'm going to do my best to answer your guys' questions. So thanks.
So we can get into a few questions. Now, I don't know, does anybody have anything burning before I start rattling off questions? Nope, okay.
I saw the swarm technology mentioned. What would be the applications of the drone swarms in the field?
You could cover more acreage faster. So they would just be stacked up. And so instead of flying 1 person per drone, it would just be more efficient. You could get a whole fleet and then cover acreage faster.
Would they be all flying kind of together,
Right.
or you have like ones assigned to different blocks, or?
I think it would look like they would all be synced and they would fly in a row and spray, and then you would loop around and fly back. That's, I think, what it would look like.
So my question's for Ariel, and I was wondering what data you guys have on how the electrostatic sprayers affect drift.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, we've been doing researches with many universities for years, and that's information that maybe we can share later, but I don't have anything to show you right now, but it's been 25 years, so there's plenty of universities and colleges that they show the efficiency of electrostatic system overall and on target, of course.
Yeah.
And my question is also for you, Ariel. So when you spray microbial materials through electrostatic spray, like, is there an impact on their viability?
On the what?
On the viability of, like, if there are live microbes.
Oh, okay, yeah. You mean like by killing the microbes on the product, let's say something like that? And still doing researches about that. From my experience, I can tell you that it works, like I said, with either if it's a dead virus or microbacteria or things like that, always work, and I never had any issues, and I always only use electrostatic system. Okay. But it's a good question what you're asking. I think that is important, talking a little bit, that goes related a little bit to the label. I would say, the label is the law, right? So if it's a recommendation to use high volume, it's just a recommendation. Now, if it's a restriction, let's say 60, 80 gallons, it's a restriction, you need to follow the restriction. But as long as it's a recommendation, you can go 12 gallons, 5 gallons, 7 gallons, or like drones, for example.
So that was actually one of my questions. It's like over the years, I mean, 5 years ago versus now, or even 10 years ago versus now, just the rates and the volume has changed with some of these newer technologies. And so I feel like that's always being kind of on the back of the mind of like required versus recommended, and how to make sure that everybody's following the label. And so I mean, you're speaking to, do you want to add anything from the drone side of like the label and how?
Yeah, I mean, it's just new technology, and so the labels really are a lot of it, at least on the restricted use pesticides, a lot of that gallon is required. And so for aerial applications, it's at a 10 gallon per acre rate. And so trying to get those shifted, working with chemical companies to begin to adapt those labels to, I guess, admit applications where low gallonage or is showing efficacy in a similar manner.
So has there been shifts in labels in the last 5 to 10 years on some restricted use products, or is that still, I mean, again, I know that that's a lengthy process, but like, has there been some movement already?
I have been talking with chemical companies recently. I have not been around that long. So
Okay.
I'm just starting and entering into this, but I know that there's been a fair amount of interest from large chemical companies that are wanting their products to get into new markets. So
Yeah, Julie, I don't think it's been a focus, for companies to do anything about the gallons. But now with the drone, I think that'll be more of a focus.
Yeah, I mean, we're continuously seeing just more and more technologies coming in, and I feel like there's these barriers. So that's good to hear that, now there's a little bit more traction with it. So hopefully the next time we force you to be here in the hot seat, that there'll be like additional answers for this. Mark, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'd say if there's interest on part of the chemical company, it's generally not too onerous to apply it for a 2EE, to submit a 2EE at a lower gallonage. Like we did one with ProBled on blueberries, we got them 20.
Go ahead.
Is that a specific site?
For 12.5 gallons.
But once you do the 2E, can you do it anywhere? Or do you?
It would be per location, per state.
Oh, okay.
So it depends on what state you apply it for.
It wasn't my question, but it was interesting. So the cost analysis of the drone versus, an operator in a tractor and permanent crops, take the grass seed out. How much difference there?
how much difference? That's a great question. I don't know if I have the best answer. I know that we do a setup fee and we do a minimum. And then if you're exceeding kind of that minimum acreage, then it's on a per acre basis. But I think that it's fairly equivalent. Paul, do you have that?
I mean, I would figure, like Lisa said, there's like a $250 setup just for us to show up. And then just for ease of figuring, I guess I would use $25 an acre as a kind of a guide that's going to get you close to what the price would be. You know, and it depends. You just look at the dollars per application. Obviously, the drone's going to be more expensive than you doing it yourself. But if you figure in time and some of the other advantages,
Well, you have to
gotta
factor
figure
that
that
in, I would think.
I'm sorry?
You have to factor in the time, that efficiency.
Yeah.
Yes, and I guess my next curiosity from that evolution is, where's that acre crossover by crop, where all of a sudden now you start going to the other side where, because it is more efficient, that at this many acres, it's cheaper maybe still to do it with a tractor. At this many acres, it's actually starting to save you money.
Right. So I would say, on average, a spray operator is 50% of his time is only spraying. The other 50% of the time he's either refueling, putting the PPE, mixing, driving up and down. So 50% of that time is only spraying. So if you have, on top of that, you add, like you say, a high volume, 80, 100 gallons, that's a lot of time driving just for mixing. Now, if you can change that with either electrostatic system or with a drone system, I think the numbers are gonna be there, and it's gonna show that maybe per acres are high, but in the long term, I think if you add labor, overhead, and everything, you will be saving money. So yeah, I think that your question, Lorraine, it's either electrostatic or even drones. I think that has a lot of potential.
I'm looking around because I do have questions, but just in case, I don't want to topple you guys. So what are the top 3 requests? So thinking from a berry grower perspective, What are the top 3 requests from berry growers? Perhaps like a wish list from them, or parts of the technology that you offer, or maybe you have it or you're kind of in development with, or anything in general that stepping foot onto a berry farm, they're like, I wish that you would add this, or are there things that come to mind, or you guys have it all dialed and berry crops are no big deal to work with?
So yeah, for example, on Target, it's been 25 years here. So a couple of requests a couple of years ago was to have a system that you can adapt, like a GPS system, a marking system. So on Target is able to do that. If you have a tracking like track maps or Trimble or other technologies, you can connect both systems together so you can know exactly where you're spraying, which rows you're spraying. That was a request on Target was able. Second one, I would say gallonage, going lower and higher gallonage. Sometimes if you want to go really high gallons, 30, 40 gallons, you will adapt the speed. You will go to a very low speed, and you're going from 4 miles an hour to half a mile, 1 mile. So you can still do that, which even sometimes you gotta do with regular spray to go lower to have more coverage. So I would say that. So there were a couple of requests that we had from customers that we were able to.
Missy, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think because the drone technology has been so recent in the area, a lot of the questions have been around kind of what it does, how it does it, and why, I guess, and less so of making requests about what we wish it could do, because we're still trying to figure out what it can do, and all of the different facets of that. I think that's becoming a more well-rounded picture, and so with that, we're starting to get requests on efficacy tests. That's where I'm kind of stepping in as part of the research and permanent crops, and I'm going to be setting up some trials to hopefully answer those questions for growers. As far as what kind of coverage are we getting, can we get the gallons per acre down? The label limitations have been difficult, so trying to amend some of those things.
Oh, Regina.
Yeah, Quincy talked about the wind speed limitations for the drones. Ariel, what's the deal with electrostatic sprayers? Are they limited?
I would say, of course, you want to follow the label recommendations first, and the regular recommendations. As long as you follow that, that's fine. On average, if you're seeing, you can start to see some drift after 7, 9 miles an hour. You start to see some drift, which is the average for any crop, right? If you're doing herbicides or anything. So it goes like with any crop. By being electrostatic, you have a little bit more of a gap to play with, but still you need to follow the label recommendations always.
And then are there electrostatic drone sprayers?
Oh, that's a good question. That was the last question. What is the new thing coming? Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, we were thinking about it.
Paul, did you want to say something?
Well, the one wish list that we've heard a lot is we wish we could, put on dry applications. And right now it's just not practical for fertilizer. We do have a dry box that we've used for slug bait and bull bait, and we have a 50-pound capacity there. So, for the lower rates, like those two products, it works really well. But we're not there on fertilizer.
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, there's always a cost barrier. And just thinking about, implementing irrigation or there are cost share programs that are available for that. And there are, anyway, so I guess my point is to make any change or to try anything out, it is an expense for the grower. And so, do you guys know of any cost share programs or things that maybe are a little bit outside the box that growers are missing? Do you feel like there's like a tangible need for any of that? Am I just missing the mark here? I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
I don't know of any specifically for drone making that application. I think, yeah, we've done it to as best we can value the service to the grower, but then also make it affordable. And been used a lot, and so I would say that there's not that much of a barrier that I know of, but when it makes sense, it makes sense, so.
Yeah, no, I think it's still a lot of people is concerned about coverage, and especially, you know, like nursery industry, Julie, or industry like that. For them, coverage is everything. But if you explain how either the speed of the water with a drone is working, or how the electrostatic system works, and if you have proof of it and you show to farmers and customers, I think it's a matter of keep training people, keep educating people, and keep showing them.
So you just think it's because it's it's more foreign than what the standard has been, that
Right.
it's just that's going to take time to catch
Takes
up and have these conversations versus the actual cost of it.
Right.
You think like out of the top three, it would be just
Common practice.
not familiar with the technology and then cost, or like what would you say is the top three barriers?
Well, for drones, it's like she said, it's a new technology, and I think people is adapting it very well, especially in wet areas or areas where it's hard to get in. For electrostatic system overall, I think is more about, like you say, is showing people how the system works. Second thing would be the initial investment is higher, but if you show numbers on labor, fuel, the costs at the end are less. So I think it's, again, keep educative and keep showing people. Overall on electrostatic system, of course, first option on target, but electrostatic system overall, I think that they have a place. Even with a regular spray, if you're doing hazelnut, you go from 50 gallons to 25 gallons, and you can do every other row, or every row too, and still you're seeing the efficiency of the product.
So one of the big issues with electrostatic is maintenance. Have
Right.
you guys moved in with your new technologies? Is this
That's a good point. Maintenance still is that's the second thing. I would say a good service during the winter is super important. I would say I see those two guys are similar. They know on target, so I would say take them off during the winter. Clean it very well, grease it very well. Use a degreaser. Use products that they will be that you know on the right rate, they will be compatible with it. And I think if you need to have the flow meters right, you need to clean everything. But yeah, maintenance is something that always on target is trying still to improve.
Yeah, I would say if you try a new product, try a small batch. Nothing's gonna make your crew or yourself more unhappy as having it plugged up.
Right.
So yeah, some of those products,
I would
most
say,
of them work once you figure it out, but if you do it wrong, you're talking about hours or half a day to.
I know that sulfur, like on the grape industry, sulfur is a lot of grape and wine growers, they like to use regular dry sulfur on high rates. Working again with California and some other places with lower rate, that will help a lot to have like less plugging on the system.
The new formulations, I've noticed since we started with electrostatic, new formulations, there's a lot of great formulations out there that work a lot better with electrostatic. So that was one thing that's really, especially coppers and some of those things, that's really improved, which is good.
Yeah, liquid copper and there you go.
Any last burning question before we break?
I don't really have a question, just kind of a comment, kind of what Scott was saying. With labels on electrostatic, there has been a lot of improvements in the last 5 to 10 years. And most of that's just been a focus on low volume. And I think the most important thing is on target or any electrostatic, it's just a very technical piece of equipment. I think that's been a barrier. I think people just want to, in the past, it's simple has been good. I think things are more complicated. If you don't have an operation that's technical, you're going to struggle. But if you embrace the technology and you embrace what it can do for you, there is a ton of upside. But you have to recognize that it's a technical piece of equipment.
I think it's like Cameron is saying, it's a technical piece of equipment, but in today's world, farming, everything is going to be technical. You're doing fertigation, you're doing automatic valves, you're doing machine harvest, everything is becoming more technical. And it's like anything, maybe at the beginning it's hard, but once you get familiar and you like to use it, goes pretty fast forward. And again, the nice thing about, for example, that on Target in Oregon, that we are local and we have the parts. Parts are simple. People would think that parts are complicated. Parts are pretty simple. They don't have anything special except maybe from a flow meter, but the rest is pretty simple.
Are you making any adjustments to the rate or like label rate, lower end of it because of the lower volume?
No, you need to follow the label. So let's say 3 to 5 ounces, you could go maybe to 3.
The lower end of the rate. Okay.
But you can go off the label theory.
Yeah, I mean, just personally speaking, at our supper table, my husband is in the nursery industry, and it's always like so hard to find applicators and so hard to find people that are like willing to step in and do that job. And so, adding this and talking about it as the barrier, I think that like now that's what I'm going to be speaking about at our supper table tonight, because like, how do we move forward, or is there interest with like a larger group of people that might be open to being more technical in a position like that? Because you could look at it both ways. But I agree, like there is just an education side of it, like you were saying. So.
And I think the autonomous has in the future, I don't think the technology is reliable and there yet. I know that with DJI drones, you can have up to 4 drones working all together. I think that's the limit that you can have, at least from what I heard. With autonomous sprayers, like the one that we were showing, either Burros or Monarch or Actonomy, that will help a lot in the future, but still is seeing it working, still it's not that you can send a machine to work out there and spray on its own. It still needs supervision and still needs eyes and boots on the ground.
Okay, good conversation. Thank you both for stepping in. You guys, more than hopefully, you're open to questions during the break. So break for the next 15 minutes. I don't think there were any questions on Zoom land, but so I think we're good there. So go. Paul, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just
yes, go.
One final thing, just a couple of testimonials. One is a personal observation with the drone. One of the first jobs that we did was a strawberry field that had spider mites, and spider mites were always on the underside of the leaf. And we went out and flew on a miticide and killed spider mites. It was really impressive. That actually sold me on the drone more than anything. The other thing is kind of a testimonial from one of my berry growers, and he really feels where the drone shines is in crop loss, or the lack of crop loss, and you're just not knocking fruit off. So that's a huge deal, and that's been an area where it's really shined as well. So
yeah, good stuff. Okay, well, thank you. Go get a cup of coffee and appreciate a sponsor while you're doing it. Yes. Okay. Share screen.
Yeah, no, your presentation.
So we're good?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and today.
So we have Danielle Lytle. She is with OSU, part of the IR4 program, much needed. And so she's going to go over some bulletins live too, which I know that you guys have heard about this. She's made a really heavy focus on this entire off season, but it's going to be a little more interactive for this one. If I stop talking now and actually give her half an hour. and then also Endangered Species Act.
So I recognize the vast majority of faces in this room, which is awesome because probably the vast majority of you have seen me give this talk at least once so far this off season. So I'm going to really briefly, for any of you who aren't familiar what's going on with the Endangered Species Act and EPA, I'm going to touch on that. And then I'm going to go over the basics of bulletin flag 2. And then assuming the computer cooperates, we'll go in and we'll demonstrate how to use it live instead of just my screenshots. And so hopefully that will help help you understand how the system works a little bit better. So we're going to start with FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide and Fungicide Rodenticide Act, which is the legislation that allows EPA to register pesticides. And then we also have the Endangered Species Act. So the Endangered Species Act was enacted in 1973, a little over 50 years old now. What the Endangered Species Act says is that any federal entity, so that would be EPA, that does a official action, which would be an official action would be registering a pesticide, that they must be in compliance with the Endangered Species Act and ensuring that that action doesn't risk harm to a listed species, a threatened species or an endangered species. And EPA has, through various ways, shapes, and forms, been trying to come into compliance with this for over 50 years. But the fact of the matter is that a very, very small number of active ingredients have been evaluated at somewhere in the realm of 5% of all of our registered actives have actually gone through the consultation process to make sure that there's no risk listed species. And because of that, EPA is continuously, especially the last decade, fighting off litigation so that essentially groups are suing EPA for being out of compliance with the Endangered Species Act. The risk to that as you as growers is that the courts find that EPA is in violation of the Endangered Species Act, is that registrations can be revoked or vacated by the courts. So the courts can just say, look, you're not in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. We're going to vacate this registration, and then you have no label. This has really come to a head in the last year with what's known now as the mega suit. So the mega suit was filed way back in 2011, but it wasn't settled until 2023. Two different groups filed suit against the EPA. There was the Center for Biological Diversity and the Pesticide Action Network. And they sued EPA for being out of compliance with the Endangered Species Act for 382 active ingredients. This was reduced to 35 active ingredients in the settlement, but a huge number of active ingredients for being out of compliance. As I mentioned, the settlement was signed in September just last year, and there was a fair amount of press about it in the ag newspapers, so you may have seen that. But essentially what the settlement did, it reduced the active ingredients to 35, and it set a whole bunch of different deadlines for development of different plans. So the one that received a lot of press in this area was the Vulnerable Species Pilot Plan. They also have a herbicide strategy framework and a rodenticide biological evaluation and framework. And then deadlines a little bit in the future are for the insecticide strategy and the fungicide strategy. Here's what the deadlines look like. And that slide is bad. Okay, so the herbicide strategy, the original deadline was May 30th, 2024. A couple weeks ago, EPA was granted an extension of that deadline by the courts. So we're now expecting the final herbicide strategy at the end of August 2024. The deadline for the rodenticide biological evaluation for the finalized rodenticide plan is in November of this year. We are expecting the draft herbicide strategy, EPA is saying by July 31st of this year. And they are supposed to finalize it per the settlement in the first quarter of next year. And then we're going to get a separate biological evaluation specifically focusing on OPs, organophosphates. So the Vulnerable Species Pilot Plan, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about at this particular moment because EPA has essentially put that on hold. It's essentially it picked 27 of what EPA was considering the most vulnerable species, or the species that were most likely to be impacted by pesticides, and designated critical areas to be no spray. So no, essentially no sprays of any sort except for homeowner. In the Pacific Northwest, this was for protection of Taylor's checker spot butterfly, which has about a 20-acre range in Oregon. The plan received very widespread pushback across the board. And earlier this, well, I guess last month, around February 7th, EPA said that they were going to put this entire plan on hold until more defined species ranges were released. So they're coming up with a set of protocols that they're going to follow for defining these ranges. And until all of that is ironed out, this plan's not moving forward. The next one is the draft herbicide strategy. This one, as I mentioned, is still in the protocol proposal stage. It's a draft. The details of it, we can read the tea leaves. We know probably some of the things that are going to wind up in it. The fine points are still going to change. Essentially what it does, it's going to evaluate the risk of an herbicide to a listed species population. It's going to identify mitigations that can help offset that risk. And then it's going to define the geographic locations, essentially, where those mitigations are going to be in place. Then those geographic restrictions are going to be added to Bulletin's Live 2. Most of these mitigations have to do with drift reduction, runoff reduction, soil erosion reduction. And EPA is taking a pick list approach. So we do know that this is most likely going to wind up in the final plan, where you can pick and choose different sets of mitigations that work for your operation. And when you have enough of those in place, then you'll be able to use herbicides that have a high runoff or erosion risk profile to them. The rodenticide strategy framework, the comments on this closed in February. What they decided here to do was evaluate the risk of bait consumption to primary consumers. So these are going to be listed species that would be at risk of eating the bait itself, or secondary consumers. So these are going to be species that ate something that ate the bait. From the range maps that EPA provided in their draft plan, we know that much of the Willamette Valley is going to be impacted, primarily from risk to secondary consumers. Right now, there's a whole list of restrictions that EPA has proposed to offset some of these risks. Some of the most pertinent ones are that all products are going to be designated as restricted use. So that's going to be all of our rodenticides. You can still get product out there currently that is not RUP. They're also proposing to add this carcass search and disposal language, which would require you to go back to areas where you have baited and check to make sure that there's no dead things above the ground that a secondary consumer could come eat. And again, these restrictions are expected to be put into place by geographic location and added to Bulletin's Live 2. All right, so what we do now, there's a couple threads going on here, but we know that virtually everything is going to be put into Bulletin's Live 2. We know that almost every pesticide going through pesticide re-registration right now is getting Bulletin's Live 2 language added to it, even if there's not specifically mitigations in Bulletin's Live 2 for that product at this particular point in time. So we're going to just go through some of EPA's definitions here first. The first thing we have are endangered species protection bulletins. And these are essentially these geographic specific restrictions on where you can use the pesticide. And the EPA is calling these endangered species protection bulletins. And it's an extension of the general label that you have to get through this website called Bulletin's Live 2. And we talked earlier about how your minimum GPA, if there's a required minimum GPA, you have to follow that. Label is the law. This is the same thing. If your label tells you that you need to check Bulletin's Live 2 for an endangered species protection bulletin, you need to do that. Should you be audited, ODA enforcement will want to make sure that you have done that. We're going to do another definition here, and this one is, I hear it pronounced both ways, PULA or PULA. This stands for a pesticide use limitation area. So if there's a limitation on a pesticide, that's necessary to protect a listed species, then this is essentially the geographic range where those restrictions will be in place. So they're calling this a pesticide use limitation area. And this is what's going to show up in Bulletins Live 2 as a spot where mitigations are applicable. The bulletin itself, we will look at them later on, but it's going to have a couple different components. It's going to have the spatial location for where the restriction is applicable. It's going to talk about what the product is, the application type, the formulation. Is it a granular? Is it an EC? What's the active ingredient? So on and so forth. And then it's going to give you any associated mitigation language that goes with that product. And like I mentioned, bulletins are an extension of the label. You will frequently see Bulletins Live 2 abbreviated as BLT. I don't know what happened to Bulletins Live 1. Okay, these are labels that I know of that either currently have Bulletins Live 2 language or shortly will. And this list is just going to keep growing because everything going through re-registration is getting Bulletins Live language put on it, whether there are mitigations in the system or not. The idea is that way, because label changes are difficult to do per EPA's process. This way, everything has Bulletins Live 2 language on it, and then EPA can add mitigations into the system later if it's needed. So some of our actives, at the top here, we have herbicides, bromoxynil, metolachlor, permethrin, S-metolachlor, dicamba. If anybody's fumigating, I don't know how frequently you guys are doing that, telone is going to have that language. Cyantroniloprol, which is Exerol, has that language. I would expect to see next growing season on the label. Methoxyfenicide, Intrepid 2F already has that language on it. Malathion and diazinon will probably start to see maybe as early as next growing season. It depends how long it takes that product to work through the distribution system. And then which uses are affected, pretty much any of them. If Bulletins Live language is on the label, you're going to have to be checking the system. So here's an example of what that label language looks like. Anybody use Dual Magnum? A few of you, okay. If you were to go and look in something like Agrian, this new label is up there. If you have newer product, you should be checking. If you have older product, probably doesn't have it on there yet. Under the directions for use section, so this box right here, the ag use requirements box, that's what you would check for your REI. Above that, on this particular label, it says endangered species protection requirements. And then I've blown up the pertinent part here. It says when using this product, you must follow the measures contained in the Endangered Species Protection Bulletin for the area in which you are applying the product. You must obtain a bulletin no earlier than 6 months before using the product. This one's off of Intrepid 2F. This one is frustrating because most of the other labels that I've looked at for the Endangered Species Protection requirements have been under directions for use. On Intrepid, they stuck it under use restrictions. So this is storage and disposal box, product info, then they have use restrictions, and we have endangered species up here. This one reads, when using this product, you must follow the measures contained in the Endangered Species Protection Bulletin for the county in which you are applying the product. To obtain bulletins no more than 6 months before using the product, consult this website. You must use the bulletin valid for the month in which you will apply the product. Okay, there's a couple different website options or links that will eventually all get you there. Some of the, like I think this link here, this epa.gov/ESPP, which is the one they put on the label, I don't recommend. I've surveyed growers, and if you follow that link, people have a really hard time getting to the Bulletins Live 2 application. So even though that's the one they stuck on there, it's not a great link. You can use this one, epa.gov/pesticides/bulletins, or what I think is the simplest approach, just Google Bulletins Live 2. It's going to be the first result. When do you have to do this? So as the label language said, anywhere from 6 months before you plan to do the application. So if you're planning on a spray program that would require Intrepid in July, we're within 6 months of that, so you could pull that bulletin right now. Up until the technically the day that you do the application, but the month that you do the application, that bulletin will be available. One thing to take note of is that you can't go back in time. So EPA only has current month to 6 months from now as options for the bulletins, and the bulletins will have a month on them when you either save the file or print it out. So should you be under an enforcement audit and you don't have a copy of this bulletin, but you sprayed something in November that had bulletins live language on it, you cannot go back in time to get a bulletin from November to show to ODA. It's only forward looking. All right, so here I'm gonna be brave. I'm gonna try to use the website and I have screenshots to fall back on if we get stuck.
Yeah, do you have a paper bulletin on hand, or can you just save you
You could save a file.
pull it up online?
You can save the file. So if you have electronic records, you could go ahead and just, file save as for the PDF and keep that in a file folder on your computer. Or you could print it off. We know that record keeping resources are really desperately needed, and I've applied for a specialty crop block grant to help develop those. I won't know on that until next month whether we've received that. But hopefully, we know that that is a resource that's desperately needed, are ways to just help curate and make sure that the appropriate records are being kept. Okay, so these are the search results if you just Google Bulletins Live 2, and you just want this very top one, which says view the bulletins. And the site is occasionally down. I would say I'm in this a lot. It works probably 98% of the time for me, which frankly isn't too bad for a government website. Okay, I'm gonna unpin the directions, but it does have directions here. But I'm just gonna get rid of this so we can, maybe not, okay. So here's what our application looks like. We have obviously a map of the United States. We can search by location, or we can just zoom in. So we're just gonna zoom into Oregon here. And we're gonna get some colors once it loads. So anywhere where there's pink on this map is showing where there is a PULA or pesticide use limitation area. And we're seeing kind of two different areas. I guess that kind of looks, on your computer, I promise it looks pink. We have kind of two different sets of PULAs in here. We have all of these fingers along water. These are PULAs that are for salmon. And so this is going to be National Marine Fisheries Service jurisdiction, and they're the ones who are reviewing those pesticides. The other giant PULA that we have here is the entire Willamette Valley. This right now is for cyanotraniliprole. I mentioned X-Roll a little bit ago. I had some active ingredients on the list that have Bulletins Live 2 language, but that don't currently have or may never have PULAs in the Pacific Northwest. So for example, Intrepid has PULAs in Michigan. But because the Bulletins Live language is on the label, you still need to go and check to make sure that there are no Intrepid or methoxyfenazide restrictions in your spray area. So I'm just gonna zoom in to where NREC is. Because that's where I work and I keep an eye on what's going on here. And so we still see we have our two different PULAs here. We have along the, can you see my mouse moving? You can. Okay, so we have along the waterways. These are going to be the salmon, and we have the rest of the area that is the cyanotraniliprole. So we have some different options for how we can enter in our information. First thing we have is the drop-down menu for which month you're planning on applying. And like I said, it only goes out 6 months. And as you can see, I can't go back to February. I can't go back to December. You can only go from this month forward. So we can get from March through September. And let's just imagine we're going to spray in June. And then there's two different ways to do this. The way that EPA recommends doing this is you take the registration number off of the bottle that you have. And I think I've memorized this at this point. This should be dual magnum. So we go ahead, we put in that registration number, and it's actually going to refine that PULA down because dual magnum only has a PULA along the rivers for the salmon. So it automatically fill in the product name so you can make sure that it matches what's on your jug. If it doesn't match, you've got a mistake somewhere. If you are familiar with the fronts of pesticide bottles, there's usually a couple different numbers. If you put the wrong number in, you're not going to get the right material that pops up here. So you want the EPA registration number. Okay. My plots are exactly right here. So if I click on the map, see this is red here. It's not going to let me print it off because I have a pula in the area and a pula not. But we can click in this pula and it's going to turn green. And now I can print this bulletin off and it's going to pull up our PDF. So here is the information that ODA might be looking for. They're going to look for the application month. So you did this application. We're going to go forward in time, say you're being audited next fall. You did this application in June, so they're going to want to see that this application month, the bulletin says June. I have been submitting comments to EPA and I will continue to submit comments to EPA to allow it so that we could check bulletins for an entire growing season instead of getting one for each month. Right now, EPA hasn't agreed to do that, but there is push to try and simplify this process for growers. Unfortunately, right now, EPA's guidance is that you have to get it for each month. It's going to list the product right here, dual magnum. And then it's going to have the limitation area. So you want to make sure that your application site, for me, that's right here, is showing up on the map as being either in or out of the pula. So we're going to imagine here, we're spraying in this area, which is designated as the limitation area. And it's going to say, look below to the use limitation table. So here we have the pesticide use limitation table and the codes and limitations table. So this first one, essentially, you would want to go through and find your use. So here's our product, the active ingredient, esmetolochlor, the use. So is it an agricultural use or a non-cropland use? Method, is it aerial or ground? The form should be all the same for this. And then it's going to kick you to a code. So for example, if we wanted to spray dual magnum by drone, then we would want to be looking at this line because that's an aerial application and follow this code. If we're applying by ground, then we would follow this line. These codes right now have tended to be the same within Bulletins Live 2, but they're not guaranteed to be. For example, we're seeing more restrictions come in on aerial applications. So this code then is going to kick you down to this table, SRF22 matches, and here is our mitigation or our limitation. So for the dual magnum, if you're applying within 50 meters of salmonid habitat, so if you're within 50 meters of this waterway that has salmon, don't apply the product when the soil is saturated or a runoff producing storm is forecasted by the NOAA National Weather Service to occur within 48 hours following application. So that would be the mitigation that you need to follow for this product if you're within 50 meters of the waterway. All right, so that's one way that we can work with the system. It's a little bit clunky because it is product by product. And as we start to see more products go into the system, that is going to be a pain to sit there and look through every single active ingredient that you're putting in there. The other way that we can do this, I'm going to clear out dual magnum. All right, now we have our whole pula again. I'm still going to work within this waterway here. And this time, instead of entering a product, I've simply clicked on the map where my application site was. And again, this is turned green, which means that I can get this bulletin. And what it's going to do is give me the restriction for every single product. But at least now you're covered because you have every single restriction that there can possibly be. So here we have application month again, June 2024. Now for our product, it says all the products with limitations in the selected area. So we have our map. The limitation area is this dark gray now, although that doesn't match up exactly in the legend, but this is our limitation area. And now, and again, I've applied for a specialty crop grant so that we can manage this better. I won't know yet. But now we have, I think, about 57 pages of every single trade name, active ingredient, and use that would be under restriction in this area. So we have pages and pages. So if you know you're applying dual magnum, you can scroll down to the Ds, find your dual magnum line, and make sure that you're meeting that restriction. The advantage to this, I mean, it's clunky, 57 pages is clunky, but the advantage is that you're covered in that everything, if you've got this on file, you have all of the potential restrictions that are for your site. So this is our other option. And then we can see we have different codes here. We have a BAB 22, we have a BRF 22. So when we go down here, we have all of these different potential restrictions. All right. 4 minutes. 4 minutes, okay. One more thing that I'm gonna show you. And then I will open it up for questions. I can here. All right, we're gonna go over here to the east side. Now we're applying in this area where there's no PULA. My site is right here. We'll wait for that to turn green. And it's gonna work. I just wanted to show you the result. There it is. So this is gonna be what happens if you're in a spot where there's no active PULA. It's still gonna give you a bulletin. ODA is still gonna wanna see this. But if it ever shows up, what it's going to show you, it's just gonna read, there are no active restrictions in this area. And so you just have that on file. All right, if that works, I'll pull it up. There is an error, okay. Try one more time. Okay, I have an example of what that looks like in my slide set. If it's working, it is going to read like this. It says down here at the bottom, currently no pesticide use limitations exist within the printed map view. And so you can just have that on file for if you're on this site, there's no active limitations. Okay, record keeping we talked about a little bit. ODA is going to want to see that you have either saved the file or printed it off and included it with your paper records to show that you have followed the label requirements. ODA right now is mostly taking an education approach in that they are not targeting folks for Endangered Species Act compliance. However, if you're under audit, they're going to make sure that you've done it. If you're under an enforcement audit for any other reason, they're going to make sure that you've done it because that is a label requirement. And if you haven't, they're going to sit you down and they're going to do exactly what I just did and walk you through the system so that you know how to do it for the next time. Okay, Julie's giving me the look. So
no, I'm not. But in my mind, I'm like, and if you get this error message, screenshot it, or hopefully, I mean, that's the thing too. It's like there's going to be clunkies in the system to begin with. So
I'm gonna have to play with that because that's the first time I've gotten that error message.
Okay.
I haven't seen that one before. So
yeah, no, my Claire was at that. It wasn't at you.
Okay, any questions? I think I have about a minute.
Yeah.
So what if you have a lot of application sites over a large area? Does a large screenshot? Or how zoomed in do you need to be to satisfy it?
Yeah, you can be relatively zoomed out. So I think, I mean, we could just pull up one for the entire Willamette Valley. You would want to make sure that you get maybe the one that has the restrictions next to the river in it, because that's going to be you're going to want the one that has the most restrictions, which are right now next to the river. So you will want to watch because the whole idea is that these poolers are hopefully going to get more refined. And so we don't have these ones that go everywhere that hopefully they're going to be more narrow. At the same time, the Willamette Valley has a fair number of listed species. So we don't know exactly how that's going to roll out in the future. So you want to make sure that whatever pula you click on in that blown out map, it's pretty clear which site your farms are in, or if there's one that is next to water, for example, or halfway in and halfway out of a pula, that's defined. Yeah.
I know in programs like Ag World, you can add farms and stuff like that directly into the program. Is there going to be a way to add fields specifically into this ever, or?
I know that a lot of the registrants and a lot of the larger consulting companies are begging EPA for an API so that they can start to add this into their programs. EPA is not currently doing that, but hopefully we get to that point.
Good thing I have a good memory. Good thing I have a good memory.
Okay,
All right.
thank you so much, Danny.
Thanks, everybody.
Want to make mention of next week?
Oh, yeah, sure, thank you, Julie. I have pretty much been living, eating, breathing, sleeping in the Years of Disease Act for the last several months. And we received a grant from the Western IPM Center to run a series of stakeholder workshops, specifically diving into the mitigations that EPA has proposed and the feasibility of implementing those in 4 different growing regions in the Pacific Northwest. So our first one of those is next Wednesday, which unfortunately is also supposed to be a sunny day. But I have 3 grower spots as of an hour ago when I checked. I had 3 grower spots left available. So if you're a grower or an agronomist and want to attend, let me know and I'll get you the registration link. I'll be shutting registration down probably tomorrow morning. So yeah, if that's something that interests you and you want to dive into this more, we have National Marine Fisheries Service. We have a lot of the conservation districts, NRCS represented. ODA is going to be there. WSDA is going to be there. OSU Extension, and then we're shooting for about twice the number of growers as everybody else combined. So this is a grower-led, producer-led workshop, and Julie's going to be there. So, all right, yeah.
Thank you.
So let me know if you're interested.
Thank you. So we had a little bit of a quick switcheroo. So disregard an old agenda. We are having Jason step in for this segment to talk about spotted wing. This would have been the first workshop that we didn't talk about spotted wing. And we now are bringing it back in. So glaze over, but this actually is really interesting work and it is very recent. And I feel like, Scott, you were at the only time we spoke about this a month ago, maybe a couple other people. So anyway, Jason, take over.
He's gonna put something new in for me?
No, you can glaze over, but only you. Maybe
We'll see, but stay in your seat, you're most likely.
You can test on it.
No, actually, they don't, because this was added until last minute. And apologize again, this was gonna be a wonderful berry tasting, but now is a, let's talk about maggots and fruits. Should be a lot of fun. So this project, it's funded by the Oregon Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant Program with support from the ORBC and Oregon Blueberry Commission. The kind of idea here is that we want to help shift the kind of standards in the industry around zero tolerance and around standards for managing spotted wing Drosophila in the fields and getting away from what has largely been in a kind of a calendar-based spray program based on the emergency management programs that were introduced in its introduction now 14 years ago. So trying to move beyond that emergency approach. So we wanted to implement a IPM trial on farms with growers where the management was focused on responsive management to field findings versus just the calendar. Then another part of it, which as Julie had mentioned, we had a workshop last month on bringing all members of the industry together to help talk about SWD management and kind of shifting some of these standards. And then at the very end of this project, we'll be kind of developing more online resources, kind of summarizing everything, providing tools and resources for growers, packers, and buyers as well. So kind of discussed this already, like why are we doing this? It's been 14 years since SWD's been a field management issue. Prior to that, if, you know, I think most of us, maybe some of us can remember that time in this region, there was, you know, most growers seem to go on with about 1 insecticide application a year. Maybe a couple more in caneberries if there was mite or, you know, leaf roller issues, but there wasn't a lot of insecticide being applied to berry crops. And since that time, obviously, we know insecticides are a little more used. There's definitely a spraying the way out of the problem fatigue that growers have expressed. It's a little blurry up here, but if anyone, that's a SWD trap, and there should just be apple cider vinegar in there, but instead that dark slurry is all a mass of bugs. So at the end, if anyone wants to take a guess on how many SWD were in this trap, we'll give you a prize. Yeah. And then the other kind of thing is that, at this point, we've accumulated a lot of knowledge on SWD, its life cycle, how it behaves in our environment, the risk factors involved with it, as well as new tools or methods for controlling it. So we want to use those to update the way that we manage it in the field. So why do we want to change? Well, there's secondary pest flare-ups that can occur. It's really hard to attribute, this one action has resulted in why we're seeing more scale issues in the field, or et cetera, et cetera. But just kind of anytime we're applying a broad spectrum insecticide, we're disrupting that ecosystem and creating an environment ripe for other things to come in and cause problems for us. And then we're just kind of chasing our own tail. Resistance management, there has been documented resistance for particularly spinosad with SWD, and luckily that hasn't developed into a situation where it's completely mitigated the effectiveness of that product, but it's something we have to be aware of, and the more we use the products available to us, the higher risk we have of losing them as an efficacious tool. There's bad public image. I think berries, like, why do people eat berries? I mean, besides for they taste great, they also love the idea that they're healthy foods. But if we're undercutting the message of this is healthy for you with the perception that they're covered in toxic chemicals, then, it's not doing any good for sales. And in this time of high production and needing more consumption, that's not helping anybody. There's MRO and export issues that, if we're applying a lot of insecticides to the crop, one, there's a limited number of tools that we can use for certain markets because they don't have a tolerance, and then two, the amount that we're using can create MRL issues. And then lastly, costs. It costs a lot of money for, we were at the sprayer talk talking about the cost for the labor, the cost for the tractor, the equipment, and then also the cost for how much fruit is getting knocked off every time we go through the field. I can almost guarantee we've probably knocked off more fruit through spraying for SWD than we've actually would have maybe alternatively lost from SWD. So kind of the roadblocks we're looking at to changing, there's an ease and a relative low cost to the status quo management, and not just the financial costs, speaking also about the mental load. I think a lot of, for all growers and all farm managers, there's 1,000 different things you have to balance at once. You're working ludicrous hours, like something that requires a lot of involvement in terms of your thought process to figure out your management program. That's taking a cost. You only have so much time in the day, and it's easy enough to just put on the calendar, like go out and apply some malathion or Mustang to these fields on this date. But I think kind of the real driving one is zero tolerance thresholds, particularly on the packer front. So on zero tolerance, anytime we have a zero tolerance threshold, it really forces us to take the most conservative approach to management, the most intensive approach, really, because anything less is a risk. If you have one larva come through and your packer says, hey, what was your spray program? And you're like, well, I sprayed, once every 14 days, they're going to say, like, well, you didn't spray enough. I mean, you're at risk of getting a downgrade or a rejection of your load, and that's a huge financial cost. So, trying to get beyond that has been a barrier to getting people to comfortably change management practices. But I think there's also some unspoken truth in that if it was possible to look at every berry in a field, you're going to find SWD larvae out there. It's all a matter, it's like Russian roulette, somewhere out there, some bug has gotten into that berry and laid its eggs. So really what we're talking about is like a zero detectable tolerance. We know they're out there, we know they're active, we're just trying to keep them down to a point where nobody notices. So kind of with that in mind, we were thinking about what packers and processors do. Typically, they have their own quality control standards, but generally it involves testing a certain amount of fruit that comes in on each load, and it's done completely randomly. And done in pretty small amounts, like 1 to 3 pounds is usually a sample taken off a load of a couple thousand pounds or more. So it's a really small percentage of the fruit that's actually being tested. And being random, it's not fruit that's necessarily at the highest risk of being infested in the field. So knowing that, we know that the probability of finding SWD is really low. And that's what we wanted to do with this IPM trial is look at fields and assess the risk and find SWD before it would even be detectable under most package situations and quality control assessments. So with the trial, what we started with, we assessed all the participating fields and farms for their general field risk, looking at the risk factors, the varieties, the seasonality of harvest, surrounding border habitat, plant architecture, looking at all the things we know affect SWD and how prevalent it is. We did weekly visits to conduct trap counts. We'll talk more about trap counts in a little while, but not a fan. I'll just leave it at that for now. The most important thing that really drove our recommendations and the kind of what we told growers in terms of the risk thresholds for management was based on fruit findings and taking frequent fruit samples from the field, specifically in areas of the field and within the plant canopy, we know SWD is going to infest first. And that was a simple saltwater test we did with that fruit. Results and analysis and recommendations, they were all sent to the grower within 24 hours so that they could turn around and have quick response management. So the sampling, as I had mentioned that we were doing it 2 times per week, and a minimum of 3 samples were collected from each field. You can kind of see on this right here where like the pattern of sampling. It's not random throughout the field. We're not taking samples from the dead middle of the field, because by the time we're finding larvae there, larvae or SWD have moved from these border habitats into the field and been infesting these border areas right here. And by the time we hit here, there's a much bigger problem going on. So we were really looking at the areas we know are going to be that primary introduction point for an SWD issue in the field. So each sample contained between 40 and 400 berries. As we said, the saltwater extraction method was used. The reason for the difference in the number of berries is we were working with blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, black raspberries. If we were taking 400 black raspberries, for example, there would probably be no yield left in that field. But sampling locations were done like I said, in those areas adjacent to the border habitats that were of highest risk. And the goal was to essentially detect in the field any SWD larvae at a level that would be far lower than what if, during harvest, you harvest that fruit, send it to the packer, in which their quality controls would detect it. And because we were trying to keep a very simple management program going, because knowing that the complexity of management is a barrier for changing management, we came up with these 3 general categories. And I know there's a lot of kind of text there, but the basic idea is that there is a low and medium and a high risk threshold. And that was based on conditions and findings in the field. And at each one of those risk levels, different management options were recommended. And at the medium risk level, it was kind of like an optional, but like recommended a more softer ingredient. And the reason for that is we wanted to preserve things, high risk being if we found larvae in the fruit, we want the active ingredients available to use that are going to have the highest efficacy at killing larvae, egg, and early instar life cycles of SWD in the fruit to manage the problem. So the recommendations were all digitally sent out to the grower after each visit. As we said, that was within 24 hours, and the recommendations were based on those risk levels. And then the growers were ultimately left with the decision to spray, not to spray, or what they wanted to do. Again, wanting to keep it within their tolerance for risk, because we can't be the judge of that. We're not the one putting our crop on the line for by saying like don't spray if there's a sense that there might be a greater risk that occurs. So let's talk about the results. We sampled 73,599 berries over the course of the season, and 142 larvae were found in total. The vast majority of those, I would say, basically over 100 of those were all found after September. It was, it's a late season pest. Those populations build as the season progresses, and the later the fruit, the more pressure is on fruit. So that kind of makes sense. The first larva detection in blueberries was on September 5th. The first larva detection on caneberries was on July 6th. So you can see right there that caneberries have a higher risk and a higher susceptibility to SWD, which we knew. None of the larvae detections we found caused fruit quality issues for growers and packers. None of the packers or growers ever reported having larvae found in their fruit at the packing shed. So that was a good confirmation that our field detections did not translate to an issue at the packing shed, and that we were detecting them earlier than what they were being seen at the packing shed. There's obvious crop differences. You can see this in this upper right. This was the average larva per 100 fruit, and the purple line is caneberries, blackberries, raspberries, black raspberries, and the light blue line is blueberries. Nice to be a blueberry grower in this case, but at the same time, these were pretty low levels. And there was a lot of the trial growers were spraying. We had both experimental and control plots. Control plots where growers were maintaining their regular SWD management programs, but they were spraying those less in 2023 for multiple reasons as well. One of those reasons being, hey, we were collecting data there and they were seeing that too. And as one grower said, why would I spray there if you're telling me I don't need to spray there? But other reasons too, the economics were not great this year. So I think we see a lot of folks kind of pulling back on sprays. They may be applying as just an insurance in a good crop year, less in a year where the value of the crop is less, and they're trying to find ways to keep the bottom line somewhat even. We didn't see any statistical difference between our control and experimental plots, even with fewer sprays in those experimental plots when it came to SWD infestation. So let's go through a few case studies or some of the specific examples of the fields that we were working with. And these are all going to be caneberries here. And this particular plot was a raspberry field. It was mixed variety of very small plots. So that increases risk because there is this continuation from early season through mid-season to late season varieties. There's frequent but not overly thorough picking. I think you can guess what that means. It's a U-pick where people are kind of going out there just kind of cherry picking the things that are easy to get at and leaving anything that looks a little bit misformed or overripe. So old fruit was left hanging in those fields, which is pretty high risk, but there was very little border habitat on these fields too. So that helped a lot. Their harvest window was between July 7th and August 21st, so a pretty long range that they were picking these fields. In the control block, they sprayed 2 applications for SWD. The experimental block, they sprayed 1 application, but that was, the grower said, was by accident. They just were kind of on autopilot and accidentally applied it to the control plot when they only meant to apply it to the control. Started detecting low levels of larvae in the fruit on July 22nd. So about a month before they finished harvest, but they never even applied another application after July 3rd. So they didn't even see it as a big enough risk or issue. And those numbers never really built in the field. So there's no market or fruit quality issues in that particular trial. This next one here is a conventional black raspberry field, overhead irrigation. It had a very short harvest window, but they had very stringent packer thresholds, very tight zero tolerance thresholds. So they were a little nervous about any sort of changes, but and we also set this one up. This lower plot here was our control plot. It has basically nothing around it that would be suitable for SWD. And our experimental plot was this one, which is just bordered up to all this riparian area loaded with Himalayan blackberry. So we kind of set ourselves up to try and fail on this one. But they had about 30 days of ripening and ripe fruit in the field. Their harvest window was pretty short, and it was just kind of the way that black caps went in 2023. They had 2 SWD applications in that time. So if they were applying just by purely calendar 7 to 10 day cycle, that's about 1 to 2 less applications than they might have otherwise sprayed. We never found any larvae in these fields at all, and the packer didn't either. I would love to, and next year, try and pull back more. I think black raspberry, of all the caneberries, is pretty low risk just by virtue of how the fruit hangs onto the bush. It's very sun exposed in a way that SWD doesn't really like to get at. The fruit itself is not as juicy or attractive as red raspberry or blackberry. And when black raspberries get overripe and get old, they just shrivel up and desiccate versus get really soft and juicy. So I think there's still room to reduce further on that trial. This particular trial plot, this was a conventional blackberry. They have more moderate border pressure. It's a little bit away, but this is a pretty dense area of Himalayan blackberries and mixed conifers. They had overhead irrigation, and it was a little bit, I'd say, less than a standard dense canopy. They weren't really doing, they weren't doing new overall production or cane management. It was Columbia Star and Thornless Marion in these plots. 4 SWD applications were applied in the control plot, and 1 SWD application was applied in the experimental. And no SWD larvae were ever found in the field by us or by the packer. This last one here that we're going to talk about is a conventional blackberry again. It had minimal border pressure, but they did do new overall cane management. And it was both Thornless Marion and Black Diamond. They had 3 SWD applications throughout the season, with the last one occurring on July 15th and 12th, respectively, and they harvested through August 7th. This was probably our most challenging plot in the graphs before, where we showed the average number of SWD larvae found. Most of them came from these 2 plots. Don't really know why, the surrounding habitat was pretty limited, but I think we are seeing that the new overall management really keeps a pretty conducive environment for them, and also challenges canopy penetration of insecticides when applying them. Even still, with those low levels being detected by us, the packer never found any, and they never had any fruit quality issues in the harvest from SWD at least. So what have we learned? Calendar-based programs are probably over-treating the crop much of the time. It's kind of what we suspected going in, and a lot of these are just kind of confirming our own biases. SWD can be managed by watching the fruit, looking at the fruit, and then responding accordingly. And that's one of the things that I think has changed from when SWD was first introduced. We thought that once there's eggs in the fruit and the larvae there, that they're protected by virtue of being inside the berry. We know now that there's a lot of chemistries that still affect them because they have to breathe. They're breathing in air, they're taking in insecticide when it's applied. So we can kill and break that life cycle even if there's a low level of them in the fruit itself. And then field fruit sampling can detect SWD at lower thresholds typically than package should. I'd say that with a bit of a caveat because there's always a luck of the draw when it comes to SWD sampling. You may get that berry with a SWD larvae in it on a random sample. You may not. There's a certain amount of luck and randomness involved. There are multiple steps in the fruit management chain that I think also we have to think about when it comes to SWD management. If we're putting fruit directly into cold storage, that is killing especially early eggs and early instar larvae in the fruit, and it's stopping the progression of that of SWD in whatever life stage, kind of where it's at. And over time, it pretty much kills all life stages, especially frozen, but even just cooling, standard cooling that we're doing down to 32 to 35 degrees with fresh fruit. Traps are not adequate as a standalone monitoring tool. Can talk a lot about this, but as we're short on time, I'm going to kind of briefly buzz over it. But basically, traps, there's so many variables with them, where you place them, what trap type, what attractant. SWD have a pretty short sensory range, so you can have huge trap counts one week and then no trap counts any other time of the year. It's just based on where they're flying and if they happen to come by your trap. And spraying doesn't necessarily drive trap counts down because they're a border habitat pest. They're coming from the borders into the field. You're not hitting their reservoir or their population. So you might get a little initial knockdown effect, but it's not like if I have a 2 fly per trap threshold to spray and you spray, it doesn't mean like you're going to have 0 SWD in your traps the following week. They'll move back in. But trapping is still kind of useful. It can give a bit of a barometer for, especially when done year over year, what your relative SWD pressure is. So if you know your management program was adequate the year before and your trap counts are even lower, well, it's probably going to do you just fine this year, if not provide an opportunity to reduce your management a little bit further, or extend out the time between your applications. And then it's technically killing some SWD, so that feels a little bit good. We'll kind of blaze right through that. The last few things we learned is that some risk factors have greater impact than others. And we're not quite sure how to quantify this yet, but an example, we talked about the new overall cane management. I think that's a pretty large increase in risk factor. It's reducing our costs and a lot of other benefits, but it's creating a pretty dense canopy with which SWD can hide and challenges control applications to get adequate penetration to get at them. And let's see, other things. There is a lot of individual situations that are going to always determine how intense or how less intense SWD management is. And so there's not a one size fits all solution. So, and I think already, like I discussed before, just economic factors in the industry are kind of driving SWD management to some extent in how intensive that is.
Have a good one.
So I think I'll end there. I think we got a minute or two for any questions, if anybody has them. Otherwise, I know it's lunchtime, so I hear them scrambling, so. Oh, Michael, go ahead.
Talking about the new overalls in terms of, creating more of a potential reservoir for pests or disease pressure. Do you think trying to identify plant types with a sort of different canopy would help that? Like if it were a sparser canopy, or does that have trade-offs that?
Yeah, we think about that a lot. Like, I think like Black Diamond, for example, the way that it holds its fruit, again, kind of outside the canopy versus Columbia Star, where that fruit's really well shaded, that creates a difference in that risk factor. But then, like you say, there's trade-offs for that too. It gets more sun exposure and thus is more susceptible to sunburn and other problems as well. So there's definitely trade-offs. I think in terms of, I mean, in your case, like breeding, whether a denser canopy is good or bad, it's those sort of trade-offs. And shade is definitely a factor. I mean, we see that on the blueberry side of things when in plantings that are very aggressively pruned and there's a lot of open airflow and sun penetration through the canopy. Yes, in any of those situations, but it's when the canopy is really dense, creates a lot of shade and a nice, cool, moist environment underneath that you see higher pressure in blueberries with SWD. So. Any other questions before we break for lunch?
Okay, thank you, Jason. So lunch is outside, it's box lunch. Again, thanks to our sponsors for that. And we'll be coming back into this at 1 o'clock. So go.
Like, so do everything from crop consulting to supply of crop nutrients and plant protection. Just one thing I just wanted to make sure I mentioned today is just the ability to do ag lime and dolomite in berry yards. So just out of capacity to do that, but really glad to be able to partner with the Berry Foundation for this event.
Cool. Thank you. Trying to think. North American Plants, Northwest Plant Company, OBS.
NAB here.
Okay.
Hi, Mike Remick, North American Plants. This is Nick Michaels, also North American. Yeah, well, we're a berry plant supplier, small plants for field planting, caneberries, as well as blueberries. So anyway, on the web, you can look us up.
Perfect, thank you. Nutrien or Wilbur Ellis in the house? Nope. Adam Co-op, I know you guys saw them earlier today too, so thank you. And yeah, Fall Creek Oregon Berries. So I think we are good to start off. Anyway, thank you guys very much. There's material back here for like handouts and fact sheets and like whatever other extras that were added over the course of the morning. We are going to get started with the afternoon presentations. I mean, honestly, there's really two last presentations for today. And yeah. And so one of them is, so this is is it a postdoc with Lisa? So a postdoc with Lisa DeVetter's lab up at WSU. So Menashini Mokonya is the speaker for today, and he's going to talk about the effects of biostimulants on heat stress and growth as it relates to caneberries.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So as she said, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow in Dr. Lisa DeVetter's lab at Washington State University, and I'm going to be talking to you about the effects of biostimulant application on caneberries exposed to heat stress. So as an introduction, extreme weather events are on the increase, for example, heat, and growers in general and food security are threatened by these extremes in weather. And caneberries, as we know here in the Pacific Northwest, are traditionally acclimated to mild and maritime climates, and unfortunately, they're not exempted from these extremes in heat. So a lot of the speakers that have spoken before me have, alluded to the heat dome in 2021, which is something I'm sure none of you guys want to be reminded of. It is estimated to result in 30 to 40% in caneberry crop losses regionally, and in some cases, total crop loss here in Oregon, and about $45 million losses in revenue and negative impacts on local economies. And these concerns are basically being due to, the leaf damage that potentially impact crop production in the following years. So it leaves us the question, is industry prepared to deal with these extremes in heat? So we know that breeding of adapted caneberry cultivars is vital, but it is more of a long-term solution. The effects of heat are being felt right now, hence the need for us to come up with mitigation measures or horticultural interventions to try and to mitigate the effects of heat stress. So that's where biostimulants come into play. These are products that are made from organic or inorganic substances, and in some cases microorganisms that can improve productivity as well as stress tolerance due to a priming effect. So a couple of researches have been done in the past where they've been noted to help improve nutrient uptake that is optimized during stress, or better water management, that is conservation and utilization in situations where temperatures are elevated, as well as stress response where they help regulate hormones and proteins, thereby reducing the impacts of stress. So because equipped with all this information, we thought it imperative to set up an experiment whose objectives were, the first one, to evaluate the effects of commercially available foliar and soil applied biostimulants on red raspberry physiology and growth when exposed to heat stress in a glass house, as well as to determine whether any of these biostimulants should be further evaluated in field studies. So I know this is a mixed group where we have raspberry growers and blackberry growers. So we thought, since they're both rubus genotype, genus, the same genus, we can be able to extrapolate the results that we get from this raspberry study and make recommendations for blackberry growers as well. So to answer this question, we set up a glasshouse study at Washington State University Island campus in Prosa last year from June to September. And to do that, we worked with three genotypes, the first one being Nika, which is one of the industry standards, and Michael has been talking about it earlier on, as well as WSU 2188 and ORAS 4715, which are WSU and USDA breeding lines. So to set that up, we used an organic pro mix as a potting media, 5 grams of Osmocote, which is a slow-release fertilizer, as well as 3 grams of urea per pot. And of course, after that, we watered the pots to 100% filled capacity until they were established. So this study was a 3x4x5 factorial experiment where we had 3 raspberry genotypes, as I've alluded to earlier on, 3 biostimulant treatments, as well as the water control and different days of biostimulant application. So in this table, you can see we have the 3 biostimulants that we worked with, Fruit Armor, Optisol, and Kelp Express, and we applied them foliarly, as well as through the soil. And you can see as well the active ingredients that are in each and every one of the biostimulant products that we work with. And may I reiterate that us mentioning the product names is by no means an endorsement, but basically just for for research purposes. So, excuse me. So these biostimulants were applied weekly for a period of about 28 days, and weekly data was collection was made on different physiological parameters, as well as biomass at the end. And I mentioned we collected different data sets, physiological data. So first, the data that we collected is MV over FM, which is a chloropluorescence parameter. So basically, this is a parameter that gives us an idea of how efficient the plant is at absorbing light towards the process of photosynthesis. So just as a background, when light is emitted from the sun, it suffers either one of these 3 fates. It's either absorbed to drive photochemistry, dissipated as heat, or fluoresced back into the atmosphere. And these 3 processes work in competition with one another. And they are affected by heat stress. And that happens through, for example, here, deactivation of this antenna here, that's on the PS2 molecule that I was talking about, or the disruption of the structural integrity of this molecule, which reduces the ability of the plant to absorb light. And how do we determine that? We use what's called the chloropluorometer. So what we do is we dark adapt the leaf for about 30 minutes to bring it to a steady state. And this equipment releases what's called a measuring beam, which is termed F4 here. So basically, this is to establish a baseline. And then the equipment will now release what's called a saturating pulse. This is the maximum possible fluorescence that a plant can take. So to determine the FV over FM, we now say the FM, which is the maximum, minus the baseline, we get FV, which will be expressed as a fraction of the FM to get FV over FM. So what's the implication here? If you have an FV over FM that is 0.82 and above, it's representative of a plant that's good. So this is based on past studies that have been carried out in different crop species. Right. Now that we've set the scene, these results, the first results that I'm going to be showing you here on the x-axis, we have the days after biostimulant treatments, that's from day 0 to day 28. And on the y, we have the FV over FM values. So the first figure here on top, we can see on day 0, we didn't have any differences among the genotypes under control conditions. But the Nika, which is the industry standard, and the WSU genotype were better at absorbing light in comparison to one of the genotypes for us. And as we got to day 21 and day 28, there was a clear split among these different genotypes. So you see, sustained, high FV over FM for this industry standard, but we saw a reduction in the ability of WSU genotype to absorb light, as well as an almost total crash for the ORAS genotype. So it becomes interesting now when we move to one of the biostimulants, Fruit Armor. No differences among the 3 genotypes, as far as the ability to absorb light is concerned, from day 0 to day 28. Maintained FU/FM on all the days. And then for the next biostimulant product, Opticell, there are no differences on the first 3 days, and then again, the MICA genotype sustained, good FU/FM with the other 2 genotypes significantly lower. And then for the last biostimulant product, Kelp Express, again, we didn't have any differences on the first 3 days. And then the WSU genotype, as well as the MICA industry standard, has significantly higher FU/FM, again, in comparison to this ORAS genotype, which has significantly lower ability to absorb light. So these pictures that you see here are a representation morphologically of the different genotypes that we work with right at the end of the study. So it just gives you an idea of morphologically what we were seeing from this data here. So for the industry standard MICA, you can see there's not much of a visual difference from the controlled treatments as well as the ones that were treated with any of the biostimulants. And then here, when we move to the WSU genotype, there's a little bit of a better morphology for this one that was treated with fruit armor in comparison to the control. But it becomes very interesting now for the ORAS genotype, where you can clearly see that this genotype, when it was treated with fruit armor, had better morphology in comparison to under control conditions, and when it was treated with any one of these other biostimulant products. And moving on to net CO2 assimilation, it's another parameter that gives us again an idea of photosynthetic efficiency of the plant. So on the x-axis we have the control fruit armor Opticell and Kelp Express, and on the y-axis we have the net CO2 assimilation. So from these results, or rather, this data was collected using what's called a SARAS-3 portable photosynthesis system. And consistent with the FU/FM results as well, there were no differences between the industry standard MICA and the WSU genotype, with significantly lower net CO2 assimilation for the ORAS genotype under control conditions. But when treated with fruit armor, significantly higher net CO2 for the WSU genotype in comparison to when it was grown under control conditions. And we didn't have any differences between, MICA when it was grown, when it was treated with fruit armor in comparison to under control conditions. But you can still see there's just a general increase in its ability to, it needs net CO2 assimilation, right? So, and then the next result that I find interesting is the comparison between MICA and WSU under control conditions. There were no differences. And this is an indication of the potential that this WSU genotype has in its breeding journey. So, and the last result for the net CO2 assimilation, again, consistently, WSU and MICA were not different when they were treated with Kelp Express. So the next results that I'm going to be showing you are, the photosynthesis data basically comes with, stomatoconductance, which is an indication of the opening and closure of the stomata, rates of transpiration, how much the rate at which the plant loses water, as well as water use efficiency. I'm not going to bore you with the figures for these data because they were consistent with the net CO2 assimilation, where we saw that plants that were treated with fruit armor significantly outperformed the other plants that were grown under control conditions, as well as when they were treated with any other biostimulant products. So the second last result that I'm sharing with you is anthocyanins. So we know when plants are exposed to heat stressful conditions, there is potential that they would have excess excitation energy. And when that happens, that may lead to the excessive formation of reactive oxygen species that are detrimental to plant growth and development. So anthocyanins have the ability either to scavenge for those reactive oxygen species or to absorb some of the green light, thereby reducing the amount of excitation energy and potentially resulting in better photosynthetic efficiency. So under control conditions, there were no differences amongst the 3 genotypes. But consistent with the physiology data again, we saw there was a significant increase in anthocyanin concentrations for, again, MICA and the WSU genotype when they were treated with both Kelp Express and fruit armor. And I think a point that I would want to mention is I know at the end of the day, the most interesting thing is, the result, the fruit, right? But for these physiological parameters that I'm talking about are as important, or they lead to you being able to get the fruit that you envision. Because we know for plants to be able to grow, there has to be a high net energy balance between that which is made through the process of photosynthesis, less that which is used up during respiration as well as maintenance. So if a plant or if a genotype can be able to, photosynthesize better, there's a high chance that it will have a higher net energy balance, which will translate to better growth and potentially a better fruit for you as a grower. And from these results, we were able to conclude that mica was able to maintain a better ability to absorb light towards photosynthesis, as well as when it was treated with different biostimulants. And this is something that we attributed to, the general superiority of the variety since it was released, I think in 1967. I know Michael mentioned it earlier on. So it has become better adapted in these conditions. So as well as fruit armor, one of the biostimulants, resulted again in better ability of these plants to absorb light, photosynthesis, as well as better higher anthocyanins concentrations for the WC genotype as well as the mica industry standard. And this is something we attributed to the active ingredient in fruit armor, which is a protein derivative called glycine betaine. And it has been noted again in research to help in supplying for being a carbon and nitrogen source when plants are exposed to to heat stressful conditions, as well as helping in maintaining that structural integrity that I talked about earlier on. And Kelp Express has also been noted to improve the ability of WSU to capture light towards photosynthesis, as well as the concentration of these reactive oxygen scavenging anthocyanins. And this is something we attributed again to this product is made from brown seaweed. And this brown seaweed, again, from research has been noted to, help improving chlorophyll biosynthesis. And this definitely results in, in more greener plants and better photosynthetic efficiency, and which may ultimately translate to a better yield. And of course, Caneberry growers may potentially benefit from the use of fruit armor as well as Kelp Express. However, there is still need for further trials on application rates, application time, that is the growth stage, as well as the method of application. This was a glasshouse study. We need to translate this data in the field to see if we're going to get the same trends. So before I talk about this, I know maybe one point that someone might be thinking about right now is the economic implication. So the Opticell, the one that we didn't really get much of a positive response from, retails at about $80 a gallon. And the recommendation from the manufacturer is from 0.25 to 0.75 gallons an acre. So give or take about half a gallon should be enough for you to apply per acre in your sprinkler irrigation system. And Kelp Express, which is the other product that I talked about, retails at about $70 a gallon, and the recommendation is almost the same as well, about half a gallon per acre when you're foliarly applying, as well as if you're going to be applying it through the soil, about a gallon per acre. And the one that's showed the most promise, fruit armor, it comes in a grainy form. And the recommendation again from the manufacturer, or rather before I talk about that, it retails at about $16 a pound. And the manufacturer's recommendation for that one is a quarter of a pound per acre if you're going to be applying it through drip irrigation. It dissolves pretty well. You won't have any issues with clogging. And if it's going to be foliarly applied, there is a tank mix recommendation, which is about 0.25 to about 4 gallons an acre in 25 to about 100 gallons of water. Yeah, so I acknowledge my lab, as well as our collaborators, Troy Peters at WSU in Prosa, Michael, whom you saw earlier on, and Dave Bryler from USDA, and Wendy, who is one of our breeders at WSU, as well as the funding from Washington State Department of Agriculture. And that QR code is going to lead you to our website, hit, where you will get information about the heat mitigation technologies that we're testing. For example, micro sprinklers as well as shed netting, and we also share educational videos on this website that you might find beneficial. Thank you for your attention.
Ken, go ahead. There's also a.
Curious, why did you make 4 applications a week apart? Is it necessary to constantly keep applying these products, or can you put on, a gallon at one time?
Yeah, that's the thing is, like I said, there isn't any clear recommendation, right, for either Caneberry producers or any other producers. You would have to make decisions on when you want to apply. So what we wanted to try and do there is to try and just make consistent applications over time to see at which point we're going to get a response from the biostimulant application. So as you saw as well, we only got to see a response after about 21 days. So we couldn't have guessed when we were meant to apply. So clearly from these results, we can now tell that potentially it would need for you to apply your biostimulant at least 2 to 3 weeks prior to when you expect a heat event for you to be,
So we need a better weather forecast than that.
Oh, yeah.
One of the questions in the chat, someone asked, would the cost of these products and time spent applying them be worth it? Like, would the grower get a good return on their investment? It didn't seem like the results were that beneficial. I mean, I know that you have only done this in a greenhouse, and that your plan is to do this in a field situation this season, but do you want to speculate here on that question?
Of course. I mean, I'm not quite sure where they got that the results were not very beneficial, because from the physiological data that I showed you, we can clearly see statistically there were significant differences for the plants that were treated with the biostimulants in comparison to the ones that were grown under control conditions. But then again, it's still speculative, because we still need to translate these results in the field. We still need to test these products in the field. And again, I mean, it's when it comes to the cost, right? In my view, if you're able to apply, half a gallon, that's 2 acres from 1 gallon, that costs you about $80. Compare it versus the potential loss that you could get if you were not to make any treatments. I think it's a worthwhile risk. You might not need to probably, make an investment where you apply hundreds and hundreds of acres, but you can start on a small section of your field and see if there's going to be any response, and then make a decision going forward.
Will there be an economic analysis that will be part of this? Okay.
Thank you. So I forgot to mention that. So we are going to do a cost-benefit analysis. So this is pretty much in its infancy. We are going to do a cost-benefit analysis of the application when we get into the field, as well as the other, heat mitigation treatments that I was talking about.
Will you be trying any other crop protectants in the coming years?
Interestingly, there isn't much that has been done as far as these products are concerned in Caneberry systems. So we are very much open. So my coming to talk to you here is probably in the hope that we'll meet people that will probably suggest different products. Kaolin is another antiperspirant product that we are thinking of testing again in Caneberry systems. So very open to ideas of.
Have you guys tried Haven?
Haven.
Marone Bio Ag makes it.
No, I'm actually hearing about it for the first time from you. So that's one I'm probably going to have to take a note on and see if we can try.
I think Mike had his hand.
Yeah, just curious, on one of the treatments, two of the treatments on the CO2 simulation actually decreased relative to control. I wonder, I think it was off the cell, and the other that wasn't through the armor, kill back. I was just curious, what do you think was going on there? The simulation efficiency went down.
You mean which one? For Optisol? Yeah. I mean, that's a result that I really can't
maybe opposite causes
Yeah.
stress itself.
That's the thing. I mean, again, these products, as interesting as they are, we don't really know, the application rates, etc., application time, the implication, all those things. We still, it's still in its infancy. We're still trying to test and see, the response. It's one result that I also can't really explain at this point.
And with fruit armor, you can apply it in irrigation or.
Foliar. So like I said, we did both. As you noted, we applied foliar as well as in the soil. Again, because we are not yet sure which is the best. Even if you to check on the package, it has recommendations for both. There's no recommendation for different, say for canberries. So it's more of you just trying and seeing which one would work ultimately for canberry systems. Yeah.
Each of those biostimulants have a different purpose because of the active ingredient.
Yeah.
Like, did they all have the same claim that they protect from the heat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all of them do. So, yeah, they all do. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you. So final presentation for today, and we're gonna rotate around the pesticide sheets while that's happening.
Yes, please, I was about to say, maybe you can send me the link with the email. I'll just write my email address on.
Once I right here. We have Stacy Semes, okay, from the USDA AMS in the packet division. And so this is a seminar that was supposed to happen during the annual meeting, and it wasn't able to. So we're hosting it here today. It is recorded, and so we'll circulate after this as well. But Stacy, go ahead. I don't know if you have any handouts that you wanted me to, or any. And here's the clicker for you. And yeah. Take it away. No, wherever you want, as long as you have access to the screen that you need to move forward.
So I know this is the end of the day for everybody. Is that what I understand? So I'll try to make this real succinct. And if you have questions, please raise your hand, or shout out, whatever you want to do. But I'm here for your education. Okay. My name is Stacy, and I work for USDA PACA. I'm actually based out in the Western Regional Office in Tucson. My colleague Amy Sloan, she is also here to kind of assist. So she also works in the Tucson office. Today we're going to go through what PACA is, some license requirements, what it means to form a contract, what the trust is. USDA PACA has their own reparation process. We'll talk through that, and then some takeaways. So what is PACA? PACA is the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act. It was created in 1930 at the request of the fruit and vegetable industry. We were created to help promote fair trade, and we do this by establishing a code of fair business practices, and we have a reparation process to help resolve disputes. We serve the industry. That's what PACA was created for, and we do this through a number of things. First one is enforcement. The licensing piece of PACA is the teeth that we have. That's our enforcement piece. We also investigate violations of the act. We have a reparation process, This allows companies to settle outside of court, so avoiding those court costs. We also have a good delivery line where it's available. You can reach us any business day from 7 to 7, and somebody's there to answer your question in real time. We do outreach and education similar to this, and later the trust, which is probably the most important thing that the Act does for the industry. We'll talk about that later. First, we have to consider what does PACA consider perishable? Okay, it's a fresh or frozen fruit or vegetable and herbs, and it's not manufactured, so the kind and character hasn't been changed. Cured or ripened is okay, such as dates. Water or steam blanching is also okay. It doesn't change the kind or character of that commodity. Examples of what's not considered perishable, so something that's outside of PACA's jurisdiction is something that's dried, canned, pureed, juiced, cooked, partially cooked. We don't have jurisdiction over transactions that involve these kinds of commodities. Do you have any questions about what PACA is, what we do? Okay, so let's go into license requirements. Does anyone know who is required to have a PACA license?
Processors, I would assume.
Yes, perfect. Processors. Okay, so in general, anyone who buys and or sells 2,000 pounds of produce in any calendar day of the year. So this is our wholesalers, processors, grocery wholesalers, and food service. Anybody who puts two parties together, that first transaction that they put those people together to sell fruit and vegetables, they're subject on their very first transaction. This includes commission merchants, brokers, and growers agents. Retail companies and grocery wholesalers, they're also subject to a license if their invoice prices for fruits or vegetables, fresh or frozen, is beyond $230,000 a year. So they are subject. We do have some exemptions, like transportation companies, if they're doing for haul only, they're not subject to a PACA license. We don't have jurisdiction over them. Growers who only handle their product, they're not subject to a license. But once a grower starts selling other product, and it's more than 2,000 pounds in any day of the year, they become subject to a license. Brokers who only handle frozen fruits or vegetables and their total negotiated sales are less than $230,000, they're not subject to PACA. Processors who purchase and process in the same state and they're changing the kind and character of that product, even if the product is being shipped out of state, they're not subject to a PACA license. However, because we're dealing with frozen, if it's frozen or placed in ice, they do become subject to the Act. We're talking about law, so there's a lot of little nuance. So our teeth of PACA is the license part of it. And if we find that a company is conducting unfair businesses, we will impose civil penalties on them. We can suspend or revoke their license. Okay, that's our teeth. If this happens, we usually put out a press release so everyone in the industry is aware of what's happening. And then we also at the same time open up what's called a violator file, and a marketing specialist works that file to make sure that those people stay out of the industry. There are license and employment bond requirements. There's a length of time that somebody has to stay out of the industry if their license was revoked or suspended. So we're always making sure that you guys are protected in the industry. We also cooperate with other agencies. So for example, when I go down to LA, I have CDFA there with me sometimes to help me make sure that people are in compliance and vice versa. Maybe I'll go with them on a call to make sure that they're federally covered. If you want to know the person you're doing business with has a PACA license, we have a search capability on our website. And this will tell you who owns the company, if there's complaints against them, what their address is, the contact people. You can go here. Does anyone have questions about the licensing piece of PACA?
What's a requirement for them to have a license?
If you are subject to us, yes, it is a federal requirement. Again, we can impose, if you violate that law, we can impose civil penalties until you do comply. So some key elements of a contract. First, we have the offer, and then we have the acceptance of that offer, and then we have what's called the consideration. So the offer is like, hey, Amy, will you sell my raspberries? Yes. So that's the acceptance. The consideration is that thing that is exchanged between us that's of value. So the raspberries, the money. So if we're trying to find what kind of evidence does a contract leave, right? We can have a written contract that we both sit down and we're signing. It could be just a notice from the person that we're going to give our berries to. That could be just a written notification. Emails can be considered evidence of a contract, verbal agreements, sworn statements, and handshakes. When we're looking at these contracts, okay, so Amy's going to sell my berries. She's already agreed to that. What are the terms of the contract? We're always going to look to the intent of the parties, and that includes what evidence do we have, maybe written, maybe sworn statements, handshakes. What are the contractual documents in place? How did the parties act towards one another? Like, what were our actions taken? We have reasonable interpretation. So if Amy can reasonably interpret the contract that we've come into, and I'm like, yeah, that pretty much sounds like what we're doing, we can sort of guess what the intent of the parties is. So we're going to look at prior dealings, and we're also going to look at what the industry does as normal. Does anyone have questions about how a contract is formed? The terms of contract, what kind of documents create a contract? All right, so some common contracts that we see in the PACA office is a fixed contract. Fixed contract is a price is put on product, and this price is known by both parties, right? A purchase order is exchanged before the product is even shipped out. You agree on a price and then it's shipped. This is a fixed price contract. In a fixed price contract, payment terms are PACA prompt or 10 days after the buyer has accepted the produce. In an open sale or a price after sale, this is where the prices are agreed upon by both parties after the sales have happened. So it doesn't go out with the price, nobody's quoting anybody's prices. This happens after the sales. They're typically given 20% profit and handling, and any expenses that are deducted they must be agreed upon before the sales start happening. If we have an open or price after sale contract, the terms of payment are PACA prompt after the resale of the goods. In a consignment, a consignment is not a sale. Okay, so the load still belongs to the shipper, the producer, whatever you want to call them. The receiver acts as that selling agent. The proceeds belong to the shipper. And the receiver, they are allowed expenses and they're allowed commission, usually up to 15%. The payment terms for consignment is PACA prompt after resale, so 10 days after that final sale, or 20 days after the receiver's customer has accepted that product. In a grower's agent, this is a very unique relationship. A written contract is required under the law, under the act, because it's a very unique and complex relationship. Maybe the grower's agent is just taking the grower's raspberries and taking them to market and then collecting payment and remitting. Maybe that's all they're doing. But some agents actually advance monies for planting and harvesting, providing boxes and things like that. So again, we're always going to refer to the contract in this situation. The commission is usually between 8 and 15%. That's about industry norm. And the the agent is allowed to deduct all expenses. Payment terms is 5 days after agent's receipt of payment, so after they get paid, or 30 days after the agent customer has accepted produce. So in a consignment or grower's agent relationship, the supplier assumes the risk of poor performance on the agent's part. So this is true even if the price fell substantially below market price. Okay, so there's strength in creating contract terms and understanding your rights and responsibilities. So you know what to expect. You know the risks that you're getting into when you're going into a consignment or a grower's agent contract relationship. A detailed accounting is the best evidence of the value of the produce. Okay, so the law requires it in certain situations and not in others. So if it's a fixed price contract or an open sale or a price after sale, the act does not require a detailed accounting to be exchanged between the parties. In an open or price after sale, it's highly recommended, and 9 times out of 10, that buyer is going to have the accounting, but it's not required. In a consignment or a grower's agent relationship, it is absolutely required by the law for that accounting to be exchanged. Does anyone have questions about the types of contracts?
I kind of like, this is a lot of information. To
Yes, sir.
So let me just explain to you how things generally work here in the berry business, okay? So you have a handshake agreement. Yeah, you're gonna take my fruit, I'm gonna deliver the fruit, okay? They usually ask about how much you're gonna bring in, what varieties or what products. So you deliver the fruit to them, and then generally within a couple of weeks after the first delivery, they'll send you a payment, maybe 20% of what they think the value might be, but there's no price set. And then let's say you deliver fruit in July, typically they don't make another payment until October, probably October, November, December, and then they'll make gradual payments until they decide what the final price is going to be. Usually in October, November, generally October, I guess. Depending, sometimes they don't. Hell, there's one packer that hasn't made a price yet on blueberries from last year's crop. Still, but and then on the packer's side of it, you know, from what you put up on the board there, that they are supposed to pay in full within 30 days after shipping or after the sale is made to the buyer. But a lot of the buyers, I don't want to pick on Costco, let's take Costco, they'll buy 10 months worth of fruit. They call it a drawdown sale. So we'll buy it, but we're not going to pay you for it until we take it. We're going to buy 5 million pounds of berries. We're going to take 500,000 pounds a month, and when we receive that fruit, we're going to pay you. The sale is made and the price is set. Usually it's August, September, but they don't pay for the fruit until they take delivery, which might be April of the next year. So the packer is not in a position to pay the grower for the fruit because they haven't been paid for what they sold.
So depending on the contract, the agent or the buyer, they aren't necessarily going to have to pay legally until they get paid, depending on the type of contract you think that you're in. Out of the fixed price, the price after sale, consignment, or agent, which one do you think closely relates?
I was going to ask you that.
So it kind of sounds like it's price after sale. Like they're taking ownership, the processor is taking ownership of the product.
Yeah, I would say that's correct.
Okay, so I would say price after sale. And in that situation, a price is not set. You already said that. It's not set when you deliver it. And because we're talking about frozen, which is very unique to the industry, right? It's only about 1% of what a packet deals with. It's just not something that we deal with every day. So the laws aren't there for frozen, right? So I can only tell you what it says for, it's just an overview of what it says for everybody. We would say They have to start selling those timely, but again, we're talking about frozen. So what is timely? Is that a year? Is that 2 years? I don't know what you would consider timely. And as soon as they've received payment from their customer, they have to pay within 10 days.
But, okay, let's say one processor takes in fruit from 50 different people, it's all blended together, and they sell 1 million out of 10 million, who would get paid?
Whoever's fruit it was, and the processor should know that.
Well, I don't think they could, because I'd be surprised if they knew exactly how much was each person's.
Well, we'd have to, don't we, traceability, so they're gonna have to know.
Okay, on the traceability note, 6 years ago, I got notified that there were picking rod tips in the blueberries that I shipped that went to Japan. And the tips were black, and I told the packer, I said, my tips on my picking rods are white. Oh no, this is your fruit, they're black. And long story short, after arguing for a month and a half, found out it was somebody else's fruit. I'm gonna say that the traceability option isn't really that good.
Right.
This is pretty confusing, that's for sure, and I'm not sure exactly how they would. Okay, if one grower got paid in August, the other grower didn't get paid till June of the next year. You see where I'm coming from? Quite sure that's the best route either.
And again, we're dealing with frozen, so it's a little unique to what Paca's used to seeing.
Yeah, because you're talking fresh where you're moving everything out in 30 days.
So the law says if it's, let's go back to that PAS. Open, it's parties agree upon a price after the sales. So if they're not selling this stuff for a year, maybe 2 years, you might legally, that's okay. Now, you and the processor can have a different arrangement for payments. When PACA comes into a company, we're gonna look at what the contract says. What are the business norms? What is everybody's understanding of the contract? If this is the way it's always happened, the processor could argue like, look, this is how it always happens. Here is the notice that we sent and we told them when the payment is gonna happen. And then we looked to the law and we said, well, actually, your fruit is still sitting in the freezer and they haven't sold it. So maybe you're not gonna get payment until that's sold. But again, this is all regarding fresh, right? So it's a little harder, and it sounds like in the frozen fruit industry, it happens a little different. I would say that everybody's story is probably a little bit unique. You know, you're telling me things that I'm just hearing for the first time. So that's unique to that situation. So I would encourage anyone who has these questions to call PACA and tell us about your unique situation so we can properly guide you to the right people, to the right answer, whether it's us or whether it's a PACA lawyer or the commission or whoever is around, you know, to help and guide you.
All right.
I know we're dealing with law, so it's a lot of gray areas.
It almost seems like PACA laws shouldn't even apply to frozen product because of the, you know, something typically turns over in a matter of a couple of weeks.
Right. It was created in 1930. There wasn't a lot of frozen product in 1930.
Has there been any intent for AMS to review this, considering that almost 100 years later, the reality is different?
So those kinds of changes to the act, those don't happen with us. Those start in the industry and move up and through interest groups and via that way. Things being brought to Congress's attention. That doesn't, I mean, AMS, we can certainly pass the word, but change doesn't happen until the industry, they're the move for that change.
And if the industry did push for a change, we have to go through Congress, is what you're saying?
If you want the law to change, yes. Yeah. there are other ways like precedent decisions. So if you filed a complaint against somebody and your case is unique, that might be now setting a precedent for all frozen fruit. But that's tricky because you have to complain against somebody and it's a whole process. But that's not going to make the changes, the kind of changes that you're asking for, that's not going to be done with just a decision. That's going to be done through legislation.
No, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
It sounds like we are. If they have a schedule set out. And the fruit, delivering the fruit and set the price later. You said that's acceptable, right? And so then all the other regulations about paying 5 days or 30 days after the sale or whatever, they wouldn't apply, correct?
Depending, I'm gonna say 10 days after resale is good, because it really sounds like it's a price after sale. The packer's taking ownership of it, they're processing it, they're gonna resell it, and as soon as they're reselling it, they're gonna make payments. According to the schedule in the contract, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
according to the, according to the contract, yes. Okay, all right, well, let's move on. I want to tell everybody up here who's trying to understand this.
Yeah. Does anyone else have a question regarding contract, different types of contracts? Let's fast forward. So the trust. So the PACA was enacted in 1930, and up until that point, we really focused on licensing, making sure that everyone was licensed, and that's how we really enforced and tried to regulate the industry. In 1984, Congress recognized that the buyers weren't adhering to payment terms, so they established the statutory trust provisions. This is really important because it puts the sellers of fresh or frozen fruits or vegetables in a priority status. So if somebody files for bankruptcy or becomes insolvent, they're first in line to get paid. However, you must do some things in order to preserve your trust rights. Number one is it must involve a perishable commodity. So earlier we talked about what was perishable and what was considered not perishable. It must involve a perishable commodity. It has to be supplied by a PACA licensee or someone who is subject to a PACA license. Payment terms cannot exceed 30 days. So you cannot agree to payment terms longer than 30 days in order to be covered. You also must have sent your notice to preserve trust rights, and this has to happen within 30 days after payment became due or was dishonored.
30 days from delivery?
So in your case, it might be, you're like, I'm confused about when I get paid, right? So that's.
No, let's just cut right, it's gonna be about October, November, December,
Yes.
one third of what they estimate the total price to be minus the advance. And so is it 30 days after the last payment's due?
If your payment was due on January 1 and you don't get it, you have to send this notice within 30 days.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Now, a written notice, this is usually by growers. Growers usually are gonna use the written notice, and I actually have some samples of your notice of intent to preserve trust benefits, and I'll have them up here if you want a sample of what they look like. Things like name and address of you and the company you're doing business with, the dates of transaction, the commodity, invoice price, payment terms, amount due. Yes, no, go ahead.
Someone just asked, how does industry norms affect the PACA application? If historically payment terms were tighter and in the past 10 years they have lagged out further and further, could we use PACA to return to the older standards?
Yes. So, yes. In order for PACA to get involved in anything, we need to receive written notice. Okay, it must be in writing. Any allegations that you feel are violations of the act need to be submitted to us in writing. And then, yes, we can investigate, we can open up a case, you know, USDA versus whatever that company is, to try to get those payment terms. We have done that in the past. There was a major company that we went in and we were like, you're trying to impose 60-day terms. That's a violation of the act. You're taking these people's rights away to the trust. And they changed it back to 30. So that is something that we do. But again, the movement has to come from the industry. It doesn't come from us.
Is there a timeline? So, you know, if you, last year they paid me January 1st, this year they want to pay me February, you know, it's 1 year. If it was something that, you know, went on for 10 years and you go back and say, hey, you used to pay us in January, now you're not paying until March. Is there a timeline in there?
To file a complaint through PACA, it's two different ways. So if you're filing a violation of the act, it's up to 3 years. If you're filing a reparation complaint against a company, it's 9 months from an invoice that's past due, or a year. If we're talking growing season, a year. So it just depends on what avenue you want to go to. But if you're going to report violations of the act, it has to have happened within the last 2 to 3 years.
But can a 10 years ago standard, industry standard, be used as like showing that trend, how it used to be versus in the last season?
It could. So we're dealing with law. It could.
Yeah.
Or not, because maybe there's a valid reason it changed. Right? I mean, we did tours and processors, and I'm just amazed at what they can do now with the computers. And, oh yeah, we used to have 100 people in this room, now we have 12. It's like, wow, you know, times changed. This law was written in 1930. So, yes and no. Unfortunately, that's the law. Yes and no. So best practices, if you're not aware of when your payment terms are, if you don't know, I don't know when I'm gonna get paid, you can send a notice of intent to preserve the trust benefits within 30 days of shipping. Maybe that makes you feel better. You know how much you're sending, right? The processor is sending you a weight ticket. You will have to estimate a price, but it doesn't mean that that's what you're gonna get paid in the end. It's just an estimate. And if that makes you feel better, then maybe start doing that. Again, this is what the notice of intent to preserve trust benefits look like. I will have some samples up here if you want to take them. The trust is very tricky, so words matter. Information matters. You have to have all of the elements in these notices. A PACA licensee, they have a shortcut. They put this language verbatim on their invoices, and then they are covered under the trust. The benefit of having that PACA license. So even though the PACA trust is written into the law, the USDA PACA office, we don't have jurisdiction over these trust claims. It's the US District Court that has jurisdiction in order to enforce payment. So I'm not the expert on trust stuff. That's going to be your PACA lawyers, the trustees of the court. And we're not involved in those processes. If a company has filed for bankruptcy, and let's just say you have filed a reparation complaint against a company, because PACA, USDA PACA loses jurisdiction, we're gonna have to close that file. And now your process has to take place in the court. And the trustee, they're gonna facilitate all of that. If the case is dismissed and you are not made whole, you can request to reopen that reparation complaint. When a company files for bankruptcy, PACA, USDA PACA, we call up an investigation called a no-pay investigation. An administrative action that we take against that company. We go in, we document all the debt, we follow it through bankruptcy to see what's paid, what's not. We're doing that to try to keep them out of the business for as long as we can. And again, like I said, our teeth is that license. So we're gonna keep them out of the business. We're gonna impose bond requirements if they're gonna get employed somewhere else. if we allow it. They always have to apply. PACA can always say no. So if you want to use the trust, you have to make sure as a perishable commodity that the person is subject to a license or has a license, your payment terms are less than 30 days, and you've sent your notice to preserve your trust rights, and you're going to pursue this through the U.S. District Court and the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. Does anyone have any questions on the trust stuff? Okay. So PACA, we have a dispute resolution service process that Good Delivery Line is free to the industry, and we're there every business day from 7 to 7, and we interpret inspections, we answer contract questions, we answer licensee inquiries. We're always there to help you with your real-time questions, and then also if you just have a question. Yes?
Is it 30 or less, or 30 or less than 30? On the slide previous.
On the previous?
Yeah. When you talk about terms less than 30 days?
Less than 30 days.
Less than 30 or 30?
30 or less. Perfect, thank you. Yes, 30 or less. We also have a reparation process. So if you have a dispute with somebody and you don't want to go through court, you can come through PACA. You can file an informal complaint. It's a $100 filing fee. Our main goal is to collect information from both parties and try to see if we can't get it settled. If we can't get it settled, then we're going to invite the formal complaint. If the complainant chooses to file, that's a $500 filing fee. And at the end of that, you're going to have an order for payment issued by the USDA. We offer mediation services throughout the entire reparation process. So it could be in the beginning, towards the, if you've already filed a formal complaint, you can always use these mediation services. It's fast, it's definitely effective, and we can do it in person or via teleconference. You would file a complaint if maybe your contract terms were violated, or there's terms that you didn't agree to that they're trying to impose on you. Maybe they didn't submit an accounting when they were supposed to. Maybe they didn't pay you when they were supposed to. Maybe you get that accounting and you're like, okay, there's fees on here that I know I didn't agree to, or they're categorized as other, and they're unwilling to explain. You can file a complaint. Those complaints are handled in the region where the business that you're complaining against is located. Western Regional Office is blue. We handle most of the US, but I mean, we have some states in there that North Dakota, South Dakota, not a lot of produce goes there. So we have Western, Central, and Eastern office, and our headquarters is in DC. Do you have any questions about our dispute, PACA, USDA PACA's reparation process? So just some takeaways. So we're clear about what the PACA trust is versus what USDA PACA can do for you. In order to use your PACA trust rights, you must have preserved them. Your rights never expire, so 10, 20, 30 years until you're made whole, you have those rights. And the venue is US District Court, and those lawyers and the trustees, those are the experts. If you file a PACA reparation complaint, you do not have to have preserved your trust rights in order to file with USDA PACA. However, we do have the statute 9 months or a year growing season. The venue is USDA PACA, and the marketing specialists like myself and Amy are the experts.
Is that 9 months? Is it from the sale or the initial?
It's the date they failed to pay. So if your terms are 21 days, it's eligible on that 22nd day.
So if it's after sale and it's in the freezer and it goes to sell, they have to meet those terms.
Yes. Yes.
So it doesn't start when it arrives to them, it starts after the.
It's after payment is due.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing with the 30-day on the trust?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's after payment's due, it's not necessarily 30 days within the time they
Not when they received it or accepted it. It's when payment became due.
Final payment?
Yes. So we kind of mentioned earlier, but prior to 1995, PACA could walk into a company if we suspected they were conducting, unfair business practices, and we could do an investigation. Not anymore. These allegations must be in writing and they must be received from outside of USDA PACA. We usually receive these by industry members, maybe the district court, such as bankruptcy, we get those notifications from them, or other federal or state agencies. These allegations remain confidential. So even if you FOIA'd the file, your information and anything that could lead someone to think that it was you is redacted. So now what do we do? So I think it's great. This is a great start for everyone to just start understanding what are my rights under PACA? Am I covered under PACA? What do I need to do? I think if we continue to have these conversations, it's going to be beneficial for everybody. Maintaining adequate records, that's just something that usually is when things go wrong, right? I don't know how much I sent them. Well, we can't value something that we don't know. So make sure that you're maintaining those adequate records, preserving your trust rights when it's appropriate, and advocating for fair contract terms. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but PACA is user fee. So you guys pay my salary. So we were created to help the fruit and vegetable industry. We are the experts in the law. So please use us. Use us how you see fit. If you want to just educational purposes, that's great. These presentations are free. Calling us is free. If you file a reparation complaint, you're not real sure, we're never going to charge you if we can't handle that complaint. So it's always worth sending it in and we can review it. Everything you tell us remains confidential. Again, I can't do anything with a conversation. I can only do something with the written allegation. And we work for you. Yes.
So can I call you even though I'm not licensed with PACA?
Yes. Banks call us all the time, grocery stores, consumers. Yes.
That's very good information. I appreciate you coming out and giving that talk today and puts my mind at ease. The biggest fear that I had through the years, because I didn't really understand all the legalities of it, but is, if you deliver $1 million worth of fruit and you get paid, 20%, $200,000, and then the company files for bankruptcy and we would be unsecured, which I didn't know if we were or not. I take it we're not now, as long as we file that within 30 days after the last payment is due and unpaid. So I feel like now we're, as growers, producers, we're covered, right? Yeah. As long as we keep that trust.
Yes, and keep asking questions. I mean, really, PACA is here. We're never going to impose business practices on you. We're going to tell you what's going to happen. If there's no contract terms, then we're going to refer to the law, right? Well, this is how it should be done. But you guys can agree to whatever you want. As long as you agree, good. But knowing your rights is really important, and PACA is really here to help you. And I know every situation is a little different. So if you're like, yeah, but I do this different, call us. I have my cards here. I'm going to have this here. Our information is here. We're not going anywhere.
That's just too bad. It's such a nice day and there wasn't more growers here.
I know.
Well, this is recorded and we're gonna make sure that we can circulate this in a few places.
Is there any way you could put it on your newsletter?
Right, yeah.
We can put it out through the commission office and on the website.
I'm gonna.
I think there would be a lot of people interested in going through this.
Yeah. And again, if you need more training, call us, send us an email. We will come out and this training, PACA law is huge, right? There's so many things that we didn't talk about today, but it might not be applicable. Maybe it is. But when we come out and do these presentations, we really try to tailor it to our audience.
Right. Yeah.
So if you have some shippers that you're like, I think my shippers need to hear this, it's going to be a completely different presentation.
One last question, then I'll shut up. So if there was a PACA processor that didn't have a PACA license, then what? Then none of this applies?
But, so if they don't have a license, if we find that they're subject to a license, then yes, it applies. But if they're not subject to a license, like let's say processors who puree and strictly juice, they're not subject to PACA.
Or if they do less than $230,000, they're not subject.
That's a retailer or a broker who negotiates fresh or frozen, frozen fruits or vegetable sales.
Oh, primarily processes puree, so what if they do frozen fruit and they do?
Then they're subject.
Then they're subject.
Because I doubt that they're receiving less than 2,000 pounds of food. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's not very much.
Yeah. So, yes, they would be subject. So even if they don't hold a PACA license and we find that they are subject, then the trust applies and we have jurisdiction over them. Most of it, I'm gonna say probably 99% have licenses, and maybe I couldn't find a license is because maybe a company bought them out and they're just a branch now. But I think you guys are pretty well covered in whose license is supposed to be licensed.
Then could we get a copy of that?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, and my cards are gonna be up here too, if you wanna grab one.
And Ken, to make it feel better, they did 3 stops before they got here with different packers, so they have a little bit better understanding of the industry.
Oh, good, good deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, our industry compared to, you know, what we typically, or what you typically serve under in several other commodities, it is good to be here and see this particular industry. Jason, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, because you kind of mentioned the ambiguity or gray area with like frozen fruit particularly, and that partially because PAC has never been kind of challenged or enacted on frozen produce, or is there any precedent in that kind of sphere of things?
So I did my homework before I came, right? So the only precedent index for frozen foods, the precedent cases would be more like quality issues. Like, hey, I have these berries, but I didn't inspect them for 60 days because they were frozen. Is that allowed or not? There's nothing about payment terms or the way that you guys do business is open / I don't know, you get advances. That's not typical of an open sale. So it's a hybrid. We don't have, PACA doesn't have a definition for that. Doesn't mean it's not allowed, we just don't have a definition for it.
Maybe I was a little bit confused. So if I take raw blueberries out of my field and I take them to a company that buys them and then dries them, they don't have to have a license because they're a dryer, or do they because they're buying fresh or frozen fruit that I'm delivering to them and they're processing it separately?
Because it's a processor, if you're sending to the same state, so Oregon to Oregon, and they're not subject because they're changing the character and kind of the product. Processors, for whatever reason, is defined differently. Again, we're talking 1930.
But Oregon to Washington, is there something different?
It would be subject. The processor would be subject.
So you're shipping, this individual is shipping their fresh blueberries, their raw product blueberries, and they're shipping it to a processor in Washington. So you're in Oregon, you're shipping it to a Washington processor, and that Washington processor is drying the fruit.
They're subject because it's interstate. To confuse you guys more, right? Card anymore?
Unless you have like a
card. Thank you. Anybody?
Are there any final questions? Anything on Zoom that I may have missed?
I think
Just want to make sure that we covered the bases, but not have you guys, nothing else on Zoom? Oh, looks like Jason's gonna keep his hand. Oh. Okay, well, honestly, considering that the weather is the way it is, I appreciate you guys sticking around. You're getting all the information. There'll be a recording available for you guys after if you want to refer back to anything. So I'm thinking that's all. Thank you very much for coming. Pesticide credit sheets are at the front end of the handouts table if you haven't signed those yet. And yeah, have a good season. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Stacy, for coming out here, and Amy also, right? Yes. Yeah, thank you for coming out. We really appreciate this.
You're welcome. I'll take credit.
Seen those cards.
You're right. Okay.